I'd like to call the meeting to order at 6:30. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. May I get a roll call, please?
Commissioner Mattson?
Not Chair Mattson, Commissioner Mattson.
Commissioner Mattson, yes. Commissioner Hughes?
Here.
Commissioner Christian?
Here.
Vice Chair Artis?
Present.
And Chair McClinton Horner.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one presentation this evening, Napa Valley Vision Zero Plan Progress Update.
Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Good evening, everyone. I'm Diana Meehan with the Napa Valley Transportation Authority, and I'm going to give you an update on the Napa Valley Vision Zero plan. Let's see if I can drive and talk. How many, just for fun, I want to know how many in the room have heard of Vision Zero, by show of hands. Oh, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. So it's actually a worldwide effort that seeks to reduce severe and fatal roadway injuries, and this is all roadway injuries, not just bicycles and pedestrians, but also vehicle injuries. If you don't know, in 2021, and that's the latest year that data is available nationally, there were over 42,000 fatalities on the roadway. You can get this data through there's a national system that tracks roadway fatalities, and that's quite a few. And so during the course of the pandemic, when there were less travel on the roadways, for some reason, these injuries were still going up. So, this is an effort that, as I mentioned, has been going for a while. It was Sweden is the country that is touted with starting the effort in the early 90s. Lots of European countries have seen success with the strategies under Vision Zero, and now it's taking hold in the U.S. This is the vision statement that we've created for the Napa Valley Vision Zero plan, and it's that we are committed to we're committed to an equity-focused, data-driven effort to eliminate traffic deaths and severe injuries on our streets by 2030. And I know that sounds aggressive, and it is for a reason. I like this saying, what's worse than not catching any fish when you go fishing? Not going fishing. So, we have to try. This is the thing. And what Vision Zero really revolves around now is something called the Safe Systems approach. And this is a diagram of what that looks like. There are all of these strategies that sort of come together where we work across sectors to help improve what's happening out on our roadway. So it's not necessarily just engineering. There are also other types of efforts that take place out there on the roadways to help reduce the severity of what's going on. The first thing is really to admit that these are humans. We're all human. We're all out on the roadway, and we are going to make mistakes. And to first acknowledge that humans do make mistakes, and when they do, how can we lessen the severity of that mistake? So that's really kind of the foundation of this. We're doing it for, number one, to reduce severe and fatal injuries on our roadways, but also lots of funding is tied to this now. This is something that's been recognized by the Federal Highway Safety Administration and the Federal Highway Administration, and they're putting a lot of funding behind the effort to improve safe systems on the roadways. So Highway Safety Improvement Program, which is what Caltrans, I'm sure that American Canyon has used those funds for safety improvements. The One Bay Area Grant, or OBAG, those funds track through NVTA and out to our local jurisdictions for lots of infrastructure projects. Also now, by the end of this year, we'll require that you have a safety plan or a local road safety plan in place to receive those funds. And then a newer program that's just in the last 2 years, Safe Streets and Roads for All program, is also requiring that you have either a local roadway safety plan or Vision Zero plan in place. This is what's going to be inside the plan. vision goals, partnerships. What kind of partnerships are we going to have across the board with law enforcement, public safety, our public works departments, public health? Everybody needs to get on board for this to be a successful effort. And lots of public engagement. I've been going around talking to lots of groups and lots of committees during the course of this planning effort that we started, I believe it was October last year. And what you see in the yellow, the sort of green highlighted ones are where we are to date, and then the ones in the yellow are kind of what we're working on now. We've developed what's called, or we've tracked what's called a high injury network. And this is just a diagram of where we are now. We're close to having a draft plan at this stage. We'll be circulating that draft plan through we have formed a technical advisory working group that's made up of public works staff, planning staff, law enforcement, and public health. And we also have a stakeholder working group that's lots of different citizens, elected officials, members of the MBTA board are also on that committee. Collision data. This is just kind of an example. The top one in the white, and this is just a diagram of what's been taking place. This is the data that we're using is from 2015 through 2021. As I mentioned, 2021 is the last year where that data is vetted. Anything after that is considered provisional until they make sure that everything is exact. These are all, and I will say that these are reported collisions. Collisions that go unreported, and some of those may involve a serious injury. Those are not included in the data. So that's also something that's being looked at, is where is another place that we can collect data when there's not a law enforcement official that shows up on scene and collecting that report and then sending that report up where we all collect our data from. So the top one is a diagram of all the collisions that took place in 2015 through 2021. And then the lower one are what we call killed or serious injuries, or KSI collisions. And those are the ones Vision Zero is ultimately focused on. Not necessarily what we call property damage only collisions, and there are lots of those throughout the county. But we're focused on the more serious type of collisions. And you can see on this chart that, as I mentioned, in 2020, when there were less crashes overall, but when you look at the killed or serious injury type collisions, those went up during 2020 and 2021. One of the things that ultimately is believed that took place during that time period is, while there was less traffic out on the roadways, there was much more speeding going on. And that is one of the factors that has come up in the data. This is a map that shows the high injury network. So these are the roadways where these types of collisions do take place. And this is pretty common across the board when you map out these systems, or what's known as a high injury network. It's typically about 8 to 10% of all the roadways where these are taking place. And as you might imagine, these are arterial roadways, collectors, highways, places like that. And then we developed some what are called collision profiles. We took the data where these collisions were taking place, and 77% of all these collisions and 79% of these were KSI collisions, to look at what characteristics were involved with these types of collisions. And there were 10 different identified collision profiles. And the first one, of course, as I mentioned, is unsafe speeds, but predominantly here in Napa County on major thoroughfares, rural thoroughfares. So, up in Highway 128, you get up into the mountains, kind of windy up there. It's dark. Same thing out in the Upper Valley on 29, these higher speed roadways. The second profile is also, as you might imagine, driving under the influence. And the percentages for each of these, and this slide presentation I'm sure can be distributed if anybody wants this. Driving under the influence was the second one, and these are not in any particular order. Third profile is broadsides. Those typically take place at intersections where somebody's pulling out and maybe there's low visibility or low sight lines, and that results in a broadside collision. High impact. A hit object, now that could be hitting another vehicle, hitting something in the roadway, hitting something off the roadway. Nighttime collisions along major roadways. It's fairly dark up here. on many of our roadways, and that can also sometimes be a factor. People hit in crosswalks at intersections. There's a perception that crosswalks make things safe. The good old-fashioned 2 white lines as a crosswalk, those are really not best standard practice nowadays. You're seeing lots of what we call high visibility crossings, the kind of ladder ones with multiple stripes. You can see them from much farther away. It's a better indicator for vehicles that are moving along an area to know that there could be a pedestrian present in a location like that. People hit crossing outside of a crosswalk. So it is legal in California to cross any corner to corner. People do cross also mid-block outside of crosswalks. Typical, it's what we call pedestrian desire lines. Pedestrians tend to want to walk where take the shortest distance available. So if it's another 200 yards down to the nearest signalized crossing where they have to press a button and wait, they may cross where they feel it's safer, or instead of waiting at a signal. So that's pretty common incidents up here too. Bicycle collisions at intersections is also common up here. And then the last 2 profiles are really kind of looking at some of the Upper Valley jurisdictions. One thing I didn't mention is that 3 of the jurisdictions in Napa County already have local roadway safety plans. City of American Canyon is one of those. The City of Napa has one, and so does the county. This countywide plan is meant to be a complement to those plans. And also kind of talks a little bit more about the safe systems approach and everything that falls under Vision Zero. A little bit extra effort in that way. And then the Upper Valley jurisdictions, Calistoga, Yountville, and St. Helena, that don't have local roadway safety plans. This is meant to take that place for those jurisdictions that don't yet have one. So some of these Upper Valley jurisdictions have gateways, when you're coming into their communities, Calistoga being one, the town of Yountville being the other, and there are often collisions at those gateway positions, a bit higher speed coming in on a highway into town. Sometimes folks don't slow, and that's where incidents tend to occur. Highways as main streets through downtown. Now, while this is not your downtown, you do have a highway that bisects your community, but Upper Valley, Calistoga, and St. Helena actually have main streets right through the core of their downtown areas that are state highways, and those are areas that typically have high incidence in collisions. Through those, we look at multiple different countermeasures. Some of these are called proven countermeasures. They've been tested on the roadways and often used, and we look to those to be repeated. Where you have success, you wanted, and this is part of the Safe Systems approach, talks about repetition. And redundancy, and that's the reason for that. When you look at something systemically, like speeding, where it's happening everywhere, what are the approaches you can take to manage that in a systemic way? So lane narrowing is one. When the lanes are narrower, people tend to slow because it feels less comfortable to speed when things are more narrow. Guardrails, reflectors. This is just a tiny example. There are literally hundreds of these different types of safety mechanisms that you can make that are engineering type mechanisms on the roadways. Some of the strategies are not engineering or are not infrastructure mechanisms, like education. So you talk to vulnerable groups, people who maybe are walking and biking. Maybe they're used to riding on the wrong side of the road, if they're from someplace else where that's okay to do that, and they're not used to not doing it that way. Or maybe the infrastructure's not there and they tend to ride counter because it's closer to where they're going. So lots of education, like the Safe Routes programs do a lot of that. Particularly when there's a new roadway change, it's always good, like a roundabout. You've seen some roundabouts coming in. Roundabouts are very safe, much safer than a traditional standard intersection. And people need to understand how to use that infrastructure. If it's something newer, they haven't seen it before, they're not used to it. These types of education programs really complement that. Enforcement, and there's different types of enforcement. Targeted enforcement, where they know there's an area where there's an issue going on. You can send teams out to do that. And one of the issues that we've had regarding enforcement over the years is just like everywhere seems to be nowadays, a lack of employees. There's a lack of staff shortages. I was at a safety meeting in Napa last week or 2 weeks ago where I think they said Napa County sheriffs, who are the, going around on the roadways, there's 2 on schedule for the entire county and any given shift, and that's to cover the whole county. So that's the other thing. So when you talk about things like eyes on the streets, people see things, you should always report things that you see. If there's an area where you see speeding or people driving erratically over and over again, report those things, and then they can do some targeted enforcement in those areas. Automated enforcement is something that's being talked about. There's legislation on the books now where they're looking to do a pilot in some of the larger cities for automated enforcement. Some states do allow it. California does not. Policy changes, like expanding different programs like Safe Routes to School, starting neighborhood slow zones where, the speed limits are very slow, 20 miles per hour. I think Seattle is one community that has neighborhoods that, full-on neighborhoods that are 20 miles per hour or less. Speed limit modification, the way that speeds are traditionally done, it's what's called the 85th percentile, and that is actually changing. Where 85% of the drivers are driving at a particular speed, that's technically the speed at which the street gets marked, and there's a little more to it. You have to do a traffic study, but it's very complicated. And sometimes when you do the traffic study, it may result in an increase in speed based on the 85th percentile. So they're looking at ways to change that, and that really does result. That means a policy change. Partnering with local businesses and other stakeholders. Wineries and wine industry is the the economic driver in the valley. Safe Ride Home programs, you often see these pop up like on a volunteer basis during holidays like New Year's Eve. I know my kids made a lot of money doing that when they were in high school, driving people around. This is in the days before Uber. I think that there are communities that do this, and why not have those all the time instead of just during certain times, of the year. So there are different opportunities to develop programs that help support people driving and getting home safely when they've been drinking. Routine maintenance, my favorite topic. If you've ever been, and I see lots of bikes in the room, if you've ever ridden along the highway or on certain roads that don't often get cleaned or swept, that can pose a serious hazard that can cause a very serious injury, and there have been some in the valley. And so, building it is one thing, but maintaining it is really also part of that support system. And then, as I mentioned, our progress to date is I'm going around giving these presentations so people are aware of what Vision Zero is, what we're attempting to accomplish. The plan will have an action plan. It'll include a full project list in the plan for what projects we're looking at to implement on the high injury network. And with all the countermeasures, and then certainly once we have this plan with the project list in place, it will position us very well for going out for funding. We did a survey. Did anybody in the room take the survey a few months back? Oh, people missed the survey. We did have good response from American Canyon, if I recall. Good, correct. So, and alongside the survey, and this was an attitudinal survey, because one of the things we're talking about when we're talking about how people behave on the roadway and back to the humans and the humans that we are, it's a little bit about behavior change. And what are you willing to do to change your behavior? And are you going to change your behavior if you see these things? We've all been late to get to somewhere, but is that 5 minutes of speeding, should something occur, really, really worth it? I don't think so. We went through a lot of different types of attitude type questions in the survey, and we had a little over, just under 600 respondents in the survey. It went across the spectrum, lots of different economic levels responding. Ethnicity is what you might imagine for Napa County. Predominantly white, but we did do a lot of paper surveys with the Latino community. We did realize that community prefers to take surveys on paper. So we reached out to many of these communities, took paper surveys to them, talked to them about Vision Zero, and we had over 100 responses just from the Latino community on the survey, which was great. people do agree that safety is a top priority out on the roadways, but then when we get into the nitty gritty about what they're willing to do, and what is particularly when we're talking about trade-offs, like if you look at the one on the right, parking, of course, is always the rub. If you want to put in a safe bike lane, but that requires removing parking, that's a trade-off sometimes people aren't willing to make. So these are the challenges that we often have, which is why it's always good to talk to everybody and get everybody on board and involved to come to the best solution for this. But yeah, this is the survey was relatively successful. We also have an open source map. This is something through Twitter or through Tim's and SafeTrek in Berkeley. You see Berkeley does this. It's a open source map called Street Story. It's still open today. Anybody can go on there. You can pull up a map. You can zoom in on an area. You can pin the map, and you can put a comment in on that map about what you see, or even maybe you've had a near miss. Maybe you've had several near misses in a particular area because there's a big fat tree that needs to be trimmed and you can't quite see around it every time you try to pull out on a busy street. So these are the kind of things that you can put in there. Again, back to the data, and the type of data that we tend to collect around safety is back to that. When something happens, then it gets reported, and then it gets observed and looked at. We're also making an attempt to collect some data before things occur and try to be a little more proactive rather than on the reactive side of things. People do agree that safety can be improved, so that's also good news. It's not like this is impossible. I can say that 2 countries in the world, or 2 cities in the world, have accomplished zero, the number 0. Helsinki is one, Oslo is the other, and that is just on the bike and pedestrian side, not on the vehicle side. But they did that through full separation. They were very good at building separated facilities, and that does make a big difference. What we have left to do is finalize all the results from the survey and kind of crunch the data into a format that most people can understand when we publish the document. The draft document is being assembled as I speak tonight. We're going to be reviewing that in a couple of weeks, and then once it comes to us, we're going to take it through the 2 stakeholder and technical advisory working groups. The draft report will go before the NVTA board this coming September, and we'll finalize that in September and October. And then the final step to this is something that hasn't been done in the past. We'll be looking for every jurisdiction in the county of Napa to adopt a policy committing to Vision Zero and to reducing severe, what we call KSI, severe and fatal injuries on the roadways by 2030. I know that's a lot of information. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane, for a great presentation. I do have a few questions to start.
I do.
Okay. As far as reporting problematic areas where there's maybe unsafe lane changes or speeding, how would one go about reporting things like that?
So if it's say it's in this jurisdiction, say it's in American Canyon, and you see an area that's problematic over and over and over again, you're recognizing a condition that maybe hasn't been noticed. I would report it to Public Works. I would report it to your local authorities here. And you can also use the Street Story map system, because Berkeley is making a huge effort. This has been open for at least 5 years, maybe more. But I think people don't know about it and aren't aware of it. So I'm trying to get the word out that people know that this tool is available for you to go and put this information in, and they're collecting this data. And we can always upload or download that data for a particular area to see if anything's been reported. And that's when things get looked at.
Is there a link for that on NVTA's website?
I can send a link out. Yeah, I don't know that. I think we do have a link to Street Story on the Vision Zero page on the NVTA website. If not, I will make sure it gets up there.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Chair, and as a
Oh,
It covers the entire Bay Area. Yeah. So you can be anywhere in the Bay Area, but if you want to focus on your jurisdiction, you can go all the way down to the block you live on. It's an open source map system. These are typically geographic information system maps, GIS maps that, sometimes they take a while to load, so be patient when you pull them up. You can zoom in. There's a little box. You can stick a pin. We often use them for planning efforts to get comments from the public because it's easy for people to go in and do it that way. You can stick a pin in, a little comment box opens up and you can comment. If somebody's already got a pin on the map, you can click on that pin and see what's been reported and say, yeah, I agree with that. So they can see, they can see the repetition. More people are commenting on the same issue. Yeah.
Chair, just a couple of quick things. A reminder to the commissioners, if you push your button here, it helps the microphones pick up your voice. Otherwise, the folks on TV can't actually hear us. In American Canyon, our preference for reporting unsafe conditions or traffic safety concerns, as it were, is through our website. And we have a fillable form on our website that allows residents to report that. Of course, using this data and being a part of the planning process is helpful too, but for particularly urgent items, we want to know as soon as we can. So we have a form and a process, and it's a little more data intensive. Like, we want to know time of day, we want as detailed of a description as we can, and those sorts of things. So we have that available on our website, and we have a working group internally made up of our chiefs and our engineers, and when we take a look at stuff. So, but as a part of this planning process, certainly avail yourself of all the Bay Area information and share your opinions there too.
Is ClickFix also an option?
We prefer not to use ClickFix for that because there's so much information that we need. Time of day, direction of travel, any other kind of mitigating something is really helpful. People are driving really fast down my street. I feel unsafe is helpful, except there's 24 hours in a day. So when are they driving? We need detailed information in order to try and solve a problem. And so ClickFix is just sort of problem here, and it doesn't go much deeper. It's good for, hey, traffic light is out. Okay, yeah, there's a street like that's good for ClickFix. But for a deeper concern that's related to traffic safety, we need to have a little bit of a dialogue, and it's easier to pull it out of ClickFix.
So is there a link to that? I mean, can you send it to us?
It is on our website, and it's one of the very first things you can see on our website. So I can share it
Okay.
with the commissioners if you like, but it's one of the first or second buttons from our landing page at our virtual city hall.
Okay, thank you. Also, I have a question about the routine maintenance. If we are out on the road or driving or biking and notice areas that may need routine maintenance, how do we go about reporting something like that?
Same type of thing. Each jurisdiction typically has a reporting procedure for that. You do need to recognize whether or not you're in a local jurisdiction, roadway, or on Caltrans right of way. If it's the highway, it's Caltrans, and they have a mechanism or a website where you can report those issues. And like Jason was saying, it requires significant information. Like, they want you to put a pin like right on the post mile so they can really localize exactly where the issue is. But most jurisdictions, I think all the jurisdictions in Napa County, have a similar mechanism for reporting on their websites where there are issues. Yeah.
Okay. In the county? Do they
I
have-
think the county also does. Yeah. Yeah. I think
Okay.
every jurisdiction has a reporting mechanism for maintenance. Yeah.
Okay. And my last question, some of the trails that I come across, notably on the Vine Trail on my commute to work, there's some areas where I'm not sure what the safest route to take to, maybe the Vine Trail is on the northbound side of the road, but I'm traveling on the southbound, and I'm not really sure the best way to navigate it.
So you mean connecting to the Vine Trail?
Yeah.
Yep. That's,
So who do we reach out to try to find out
I think that's my
advice on
phone.
the best path, the safest path to take?
Sorry about my phone ringing and that I forgot to silent. Oh, I could turn it off from my watch. Yes, connections to the Vine Trail. And of course, the Vine Trail is where most people believe that's the safest route to take. If you're not, if you're in that rider typology, what we call the interested but concerned, typically like to have a separated facility to ride on. And that's one of the things that we'll be updating the countywide bike plan. It's a bit dated. It was adopted in 2019, so it's time to update that bike plan. And one of the and now that we've gone through this whole Vision Zero process, we're going to be looking at connectivity to the safer routes, particularly around biking. And now that we also know there are issues around biking and intersections, oftentimes you can be on a safe route, and then you come up to the big arterial or the big crossing, and then you go, now what do I do? So those are the things that we want to identify. My goal, we have a new staff member who has some GIS skills. We've never had the bike system on the map, the county GIS map, so we want to get the biking infrastructure on there and update the countywide bike map, and also include what are called story maps so that you can actually pull up a photo and see what the condition is in that area. Do you want to bike there? Maybe, maybe not. What's another route? And you can look and see. So this is a goal we have in the next year as we update the bike plan, is to make sure that we map out the current existing infrastructure so that you can decide what's your safest route for the way your comfort level as a biker. That's something that we really want to see happen in the next iteration of the bike plan.
Wonderful, thank you. Commissioner Christian, do you have a comment or question?
I do have. Thanks, Diana. So are both the LP, the local roadway safety plan and the Vision Zero required for those grants you mentioned?
Yeah, so the ones that I mentioned earlier, HSIP has required, I think, since the last cycle, the cycle 10 HSIP recommended it. Cycle 11, which we just went through, required it. So if you didn't have a local roadway safety plan in place, you were not eligible for HSIP funding. And then now for OBAG funding, they are also requiring it, and that has to be adopted by the end of this year, which is why we're doing Vision Zero now. But any jurisdiction that has a LRSP or local roadway safety plan is eligible for those funds. And then Vision Zero brings it up another level, particularly for the Safe Streets and Roads for All.
But then you're doing them for Yountville and St. Helena and that, but they
Yeah.
won't have a LRSP.
That's okay. This will cover that base. Yeah.
So you really only need the Vision Zero. You don't really-
You need some form of roadway safety plan.
Right.
Yeah, there's certain criteria, and we'll meet all that criteria within this plan, so that they'll be eligible for
And
those
this is an
funds.
initiative at NVTA?
Yes,
And did you get grant funding to fund the study?
we did. We got some funding through MTC, and we're using some of our own CMA funds to pay for this.
Great.
Yeah.
And who's the agency overseeing the TIMS data?
The TIMS data is out of UC Berkeley, SafeTrek. It's called SafeTrek.
So it's
That's the Transportation Injury Mapping System, and that's through UC Berkeley. And they use SWITR's data. So SWITR's is a statewide injury mapping system where all the information for roadway collisions are reported. Anything that's reported goes into the SWITR system. That's a statewide system. And that's
who's
through-
responsible for that?
That's that's law enforcement.
But I
Yeah.
mean-
and then on the state is who manages the SWITR system.
State of California, so
California.
Department of Transportation maybe, or
When you say
State Department of Transportation?
yeah,
Is
I
that-
mean, I think it might be CALSTA, California State Transportation Association.
There's an Office of Traffic Safety, OTS, that manages the SWITR's data.
Is
I don't
OTS
know-
the manager of SWITR's?
Yeah, OTS. I just don't know which department they're in.
Yeah.
Well, what I'm
There's
getting,
layers of layers of layers here.
yeah, what I'm getting at, because we've discussed this before, and there's not really any agency that's monitoring bicycle pedestrian conflicts. And you mentioned here, if there's a bicycle collision, two bikes colliding in an intersection, then maybe SWITR's does that, but they're not going to do it on the
Only
trail
if it's
anywhere.
reported.
Hmm?
SWITR's is only going to collect data it has to be reported. Like, somebody has to, an officer has to show up on scene, or somebody has to call, and it gets reported. But again, some of these collisions that happen go unreported. People crash, maybe somebody doesn't go to the hospital, and they say, okay, here's my number, and they leave the scene, and it goes unreported. Those types of collision, those are not in the data.
Yeah,
Only
so what I would-
reported collisions go into the data.
Yeah, and you would have to get people, you would have to do a public campaign to get people to say, hey, look, if you get in an accident, report it. Because otherwise it's not going to get done. Whereas if it's on the road, there's insurance, there's police involved, especially if there's an injury, that's going to get reported. But I would like to see some way that we could figure out to get people so that we have that information. Because my question would be, if you're not gathering data on pedestrian and I'll call them wheeled transportation, bikes, scooters.
Well, there's
skateboards.
data in here that also is inclusive of pedestrians and bicycles. It covers all the data.
Yeah, but
And again, only
it's not-
reported.
if it's not being reported, then we don't have the data.
We don't.
So then in that case, what informs the education efforts that you're
Well,
doing?
and that's kind of one of the efforts, that the reason that the Tim's group and Safe Trek in Berkeley is making this attempt through Street Story to collect some of this data. You know, maybe you were in a crash, a solo crash on your bike, you broke your arm, you called your friend, they took you to the hospital. There was no report into the system. There are some efforts on the state level, I can tell you, through the State Highway Safety Program, to look at maybe cross-comparing emergency room data and collecting data that way, where somebody might have an injury, show up to the hospital, but it didn't get reported through the roadway reporting system or the SWITR system. And
Yeah.
if there's a way that they can collect data that way, and I know there's some efforts moving in that direction.
Yeah, because if Tim's is focusing on Twitter, then they're not picking up the stuff that's not reported from bicycle stuff. So it seems to me,
Only through Street Story. Anything that's reported through
What is
Street
Street
Story.
Story?
That's the one I mentioned earlier, where you can go on the map and pin the map and
Yeah.
say you've had a collision. You can go on that map and say, I collided with a pedestrian here. We dusted off and went our separate ways, but this happened. You can report it there, and they are collecting that data. Again, this is anecdotal. You know, we don't know for a fact because there is no official report in the system. So, you know, it will be viewed that way, you know, but it is information, and it is information that can be valuable.
so my suggestion would be that as part of Vision Zero, there be some effort made to publicize that. I've been involved in this, you know, and I didn't know about the Street Story. I wouldn't know to direct somebody. So I'm thinking, as part of the grant funding that you get, if you could help publicize that, because we do need that data in order to make good decisions to education, for legislation, regulation, whatever. But it's just not being collected, and we've talked about that before. And you did mention that the CHP you mentioned recently, you found that CHP was starting to collect some of that data that you didn't know they were required to do. You said that as you've started to look at stuff, you're finding more and more sources of reports
The
between
State Highway Safety Program, SHSP, they have what are called different challenge areas. Some focus on, you know, intoxicated driving. Some focused on strictly on bikes, pedestrians. I actually sit on both of those committees for bikes and pedestrians to look at what's being viewed to, you know, make changes. And they don't address anything legislatively, I will tell you that. They only look at different types of projects they can do. One of the things that I know that they've worked on is to get updates to the Department of Motor Vehicle handbook, the driver's handbook, and get some of this newer infrastructure that's, you know, green lanes, things like that weren't in the original handbooks. People aren't aware of this type of infrastructure. They're making attempts at getting the driver handbook changed, and also looking at maybe putting together a bicycle rider handbook where, you know, there's no licensing required to ride a bike, but there could be helpful information that might assist people who are choosing to ride a bike for transportation or whatever. But so there's a lot of effort on that side. I think anybody can join into those committees. They're always looking for volunteers to help, and you can bring forward something to the challenge area. It goes through a huge process for them to decide whether or not they're going to work towards it or not. There's a multiple layers. So you can present it, say, I think this is worth the effort. It goes through several committees up to the state, and then they decide, are they going to add that to the list of efforts in each of the unique challenge areas?
So what I'm trying to do is just advocate for the collection of that data, you know, whatever. I'm already on your committee, so, and I'm advocating there, but I'm open to ideas or planting a seed or asking to get that kind of data so that we are collecting it and utilizing it, so that can help reduce it. It may not be the same level as a car running into a pedestrian. I know those are more serious, but the other part of it is even if it doesn't hurt somebody, if people stop walking, they stop using walking paths because they're intimidated or afraid, how do we know? You know, how do we gather that data? So I'm just asking in whatever ways you can, if you can think of ways to advocate for letting people maybe signage on the trails as we develop the Vine Trail on that, but to let people know, hey, report, if you have an accident, report it so we can keep track of it and figure out what's the best practice to do. And the last comment is, if I read the poll right, there was a combination of strongly disagree and disagree about walking on rural trails feeling safe, and it looked like it was 75% of the
And it was rural roadways, not necessarily just trails. So lots
rural.
of our rural
Rural.
areas don't have sidewalk infrastructure. People might actually have to walk in the roadway. And some people feel okay doing that. Some people don't necessarily feel okay doing that.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that that's what we have.
Yeah,
It's
we have a lot of those.
We were a
Yeah.
rural community, now we're a city, but we still have the rural highway, no sidewalks, and 75% of the public do not feel safe walking out there. So I'm just throwing that out there. Thanks. Thank you for your presentation too. Good job.
You're welcome. There's one last thing I do want to say. I said to Chair McClinton Horner I was going to teach her a new word, and this kind of goes back to what we identify these incidents as, and we call them accidents. And what Safe Systems approach says is to call them what they are. If we call them an accident, what does that really allude to? That means nothing could have been done to correct it. It was just occurred, it happened, we move on, that's what it is. So we call them what they are. In Vision Zero, you'll only hear me call them a crash or a collision. And I'm inviting all of you to do the same.
Thank you. Commissioner Mattson?
Hi, Diana. Thank you so much. I have, I think, 3 questions. One is, it sounds like what's going to come out of this is a plan of, a list of where we need to make changes in the county. Is that plan pretty much to be based on where these problem areas have been identified?
Yes,
Okay.
it's data driven in terms of where is the map that I showed earlier, the high injury network map. So those roadways that have been mapped as where these types of high killed or serious injury collisions take place, those are going to be the focus areas, and those are the projects that we're going to be looking at. Some of these projects are already on the books; they're in other plans, but we need funding to implement these projects. So this will put us in a new position to go out for some of this safety funding that we weren't eligible for in the past. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks. And then branching off of that, by the jurisdictions adopting the Zero Vision plan, can we leverage that for funding requests for safe bike and ped routes?
Absolutely.
Okay, and are there funding sources we should be aware of at this point? I think that's a different question, so.
Yeah, your staff here is, they're on it. They know. We have a technical advisory committee. We meet once a month with Public Works and planning staff. We keep everybody tuned into what funding sources are available, including planning dollars out there. Sometimes, before you get to the project, you have to go through a planning process, particularly a specific plan, very much like we did through NVTA in cooperation with American Canyon for SR 29 out here, and that was some years in the making, but those plans are expensive and they take a lot of effort and the gathering of a lot of data to kind of come to the best solutions involved. So there are lots of sources for planning funds out there too, particularly revolved around safety, and now there's some newer ones where you have a community such as this one that are divided by highways. It's called Reconnecting Communities, and they're really looking at what are the things that we can do now where communities have historically been divided by a huge highway, and now they're looking for ways to reverse that.
Is that state or federal funding?
That's federal funding.
Federal, okay,
Mhm.
great, thank you, that was all I had.
Any other commissioner questions or comments? Okay, public comment for items not on the agenda?
Thank you, Diana.
Thank you.
Sorry, thank you.
You can go now.
Do we have a public comment for presentations? Is that-
We do not.
No.
Just say it again.
Public comment for items not on the agenda?
Yes. So we did have one written public comment submitted by Kim Hester Williams. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to make a public comment? Is there anyone in Zoom? We have one public comment in Zoom. Hi, Justin. Can you hear us?
Yes, hi Liz, and I want to make a very brief comment, and I want to say thank to Diane because I hear her. I went in a lot of meeting with them. I was just need to shout out with her because she's doing a great job to make a sideshow, and she talked about a safety sidewalk or bike ride. So Diane, great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Chair, that's all the public comment we have.
Okay, thank you. Okay, are any agenda changes proposed this evening? Okay. On the consent calendar, we have the minutes for the Open Space, Active Transportation, and Sustainability Commission meeting of June 7th. Could I get a,
I couldn't find them when I was looking at the agenda online, so I just have them now in the packet. Can I just have a second to find them?
sure.
Anybody know what page they're on? This thing is huge.
It should be right
Right
after.
in the front. Okay, here we go.
Chair, there are actually two items on the consent calendar. It's both minutes from the June 7th regular meeting and the June 20th special meeting, items 2 and 3.
Can we cover them in the same motion?
Correct. Correct. Just for everyone's edification, the consent calendar lists routine or mundane items that can all be carried with a single motion and a single vote. So that's what's presented for items 2 and 3.
I'll move to approve both the minutes for those two meetings.
Did I get a
I'll second that.
Okay. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Mattson,
Yes.
Commissioner Hughes,
Yes.
Commissioner Christian,
Yes?
Vice Chair Artis,
Yes.
and Chair McClinton Horner.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one item of business, sustainability initiatives for fiscal year 2023 to 24.
Thank you, Chair. This item tonight is meant to be an informational item, meant to drill into the topic of sustainability, which is probably the most nebulous topic that is of this commission's purview, or the most recently added. And thank you. So we're done. We're not done. Next. And so wanted to cover just a little bit of background, make sure everyone's starting from the same place about where we've been and where we're trying to go. There's a couple of things that is of interest from the City Council, and we'll get into those as well. And I know there's members of the public. I'm sure there'll be some comments from members of the public. We did receive, I want to say 7 or 8 public comments on this item that you all should have been able to see in your emails. Starting back in February of 22, the council adopted a resolution that's 2207, and it shows up on page 13 of the packet. And it did a number of things, but one of the things that the resolution did was to create what was known as a ad hoc climate action committee, and that was led by council members Joseph and Washington, and they developed an interim report about climate action plans. And so the council had asked that committee to give them a report by August 1st, in which they did. And then it was about a month later when they presented that report to the City Council. That report kind of starts on page 16 of the packet and covers numerous target areas and action items, 33 of them in total. And then starting on, we'll leave it for the moment with that interim action plan. The council did not adopt that plan. What they did was sort of take it under consideration, but they didn't adopt it. And there were a couple of things going on in the background at the time that kind of explains why. The first of which was actually this body. There was quite a bit of dialogue around the predecessor to this body and what to do. And so ultimately, later in December and January, they actually put the S in OSATs, if you will, and added sustainability to this body's purview. But at the time, there wasn't a commission addressing sustainability issues in August of 2022. So we kind of had that going on. And at the same time, the countywide Climate Action Committee had embarked on and was still working on a study about greenhouse gases. Where are they forecasted to come from? What are the projections for greenhouse gases prospectively? So that study was ongoing. So the interim action plan that they came up with didn't have the benefit of either of those two ideas. They didn't have the report of all the information was still being prepared, and there wasn't a body necessarily to vest their efforts into. They were sort of creating that on their own, which was all fine. That's how these things sort of get started. So you kind of fast forward to April, which starts really on page 26 of the presentation. And this was the PowerPoint presentation that kind of accompanied this draft report. And by that time, OSATs now exists. This is one of the real first times where sustainability is going to become kind of handed off to this body. So that was something that the council had wanted to happen. They didn't want the ad hoc committee to continue on in its own purposes at least as a local government committee. And instead, they deliberately wanted this transition. So that kind of handoff happens in April. Starting on page 26 is that presentation to you all. And it is largely builds upon the interim report that had been done the prior fall. And starting now on page 45 was the inventory that had been done in that fall. So this was on page 45 starts the inventory of current greenhouse gas emissions, and then there is also a forecast document that starts on page, I forget which page now the forecast starts on, but both of these documents are presented starting on page 45. It's both an inventory and forecast, and the forecast really acknowledges the actions that are pending at the state level, both as it relates to building efficiencies and the use of energy in buildings and the transportation sector. There are a number of monumental changes that are on the horizon from a regulatory perspective. New automobiles in the future will not be fossil fuel powered. They'll be powered from some other means. And there are many changes that relates to building efficiency, the use of natural gas, and will be going away. And so the forecast, the greenhouse gas forecast projects those, the implications of those regulatory changes in the years that they are predicted to occur. But they don't take into this, the inventory that was done by the consultants for the climate committee, the countywide committee, didn't take into consideration any of the work that the ad hoc committee had done, meaning it was something that this regional body had been working on. They knew that the state was working on things. They didn't plug in some of the ideas from the local report here and say, oh, and American Canyon's doing this, or we're changing American Canyon's forecast or whatever. It was not that they were disconnected, but the Climate Action Committee's report was meant to be for all of the jurisdictions in the county, and it was a kind of meant to be kind of apples to apples to the best they could. So it was kind of comparing everybody and meant to be that sort of level playing field. So although the consultants were aware that American Canyon had this committee and was working on some things, they didn't take some of the ideas in that report and then put them into that countywide effort. So it's another way of saying, and I'll put this out there as just sort of an idea, the recommendations that are in this interim report, very comprehensive, a lot of ideas in there. They don't come with the same sort of background or forecast that the countywide committee did. The countywide committee said, we know there's not going to be fossil fuel vehicles. We know that natural gas appliances and such are going to be phased out, so we can predict how that will affect greenhouse gas emissions. We've not done that comparable level of study on any of the recommendations in this local report. And it's something I think it's bears thinking about is we have 33 good ideas that could be implemented, could be rolled into a report, all sorts of things. We've never studied what that would do to the trajectory. We do know what the trajectory of the statewide change on automobiles and the statewide change on using natural gas in different building situations. We have not studied any of the aspects or implementation of this local report. So it's just something to know. We don't know in the same measured way that we think those other things are. Hopefully that made sense. So that's those
Can I
are.
ask a quick question? So I thought when they presented this to us that they said there was a way to drill down and give us the American Canyon forecast. Maybe I
They did.
misremember it.
No, the inventory does have the American Canyon forecast, but it doesn't have changes different than anybody else. It only
Yeah,
it
I
only-
get that, but I don't see in this document just American Canyon in the forecast. Maybe haven't
No,
found it yet.
there are a number of breakdowns by jurisdiction, starting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I found it.
Yeah, there are a number of.
Thank
They drilled into each city's population, each city's households, projected populations, projected water use, projected garbage, and those sorts of things. And they did that for everybody, all of the jurisdictions. But they didn't take the specific American Canyon ideas and then fold them into a separate part of the report for American Canyon. It was a uniform application of different changes and meant to serve all of the jurisdictions who are paying for it. So hopefully that makes sense.
Well, it makes sense, but I'm saying I don't see a table that shows projections to 2030. Isn't that what they were doing? Just projecting to
I think
2030?
I think page 59.
Sorry.
Let's look at page 59 here.
9 of
what I
their
have.
document or of?
Page 59 of the staff report. So,
the-
yeah, so here's the American Canyon emissions summary, and it starts to forecast 2019 versus 2030, and it talks
Okay,
about.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I see it.
And
I
so
apologize.
the previous page was kind of by jurisdiction, population, employment, the annual VMT, those sorts of characteristics. And then table 19, section 4.1, page 59 of the staff report drills into American Canyon, and then the other jurisdictions are.
Okay, so this is
thereafter.
assuming that nothing changed,
No.
except for the statewide requirement.
Correct. This table assumes and they call it the business as usual case. They bake that business as usual case as the regulatory schemes are implemented as currently proposed. Which is why if you start taking a look at table 19 specifically, if you look at, for example, the row that says on-road transportation, there's projected to be a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2030 of 21%, in large part because there's no longer vehicles being sold, there's more electric vehicles being sold, and that replacement has started to happen. So that's one example of why that would go down.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Hopefully that's clear for everybody. So we have this report, and one of the there's a couple of outcomes that the council is looking for, and we're going to kind of have to use our left brain and our right brain in this exercise. So there's sort of very big picture ideas that the council's interested in feedback in, and then there's very specific short-term, very low-level kinds of things that the council's interested too. So, again, we have this interim report that's in a draft mode and hasn't been adopted. They very much want feedback from the community on this report and the ideas in this report. They're concerned that all 22,000 people in American Canyon haven't had an opportunity to weigh in and think about this. So, as with everything, they want as much public input and so forth. And it's great to see a lot of folks here tonight, but they're really focused on American Canyon residents, American Canyon businesses. What do they think about the items in this report? So that's kind of this holistic idea that's operating in the background. They're also not wanting to just wait on everything until we get all this input and we make all this perfect, whatever that actually means. They're not wanting perfect to be in the way of progress. So there's a notion on the very low-hanging fruit side of the equation. Are there 2 or 3 items that seem simple enough that may or may not be already in progress or could simply be done without a lot of other brain damage? And can can we identify those? Can we get working on some of those ideas? While we work with the community to say, is this the current climate action plan that you want, that you will support? And as we get into that last topic, it gets back to even the very beginning in February, when we start talking about what's the actual goal, what's the actual purpose of this. So and we'll kind of go back to that resolution, which starts on page 13. And actually, the goal itself is on page 14, and it talks about a goal of net zero climate pollution on or before the year 2030. And so, what we know, and why I included that document as it related to what the Academy of Sciences is talking about, is the 2030 time horizon is a particular time horizon. There are other time horizons. There is sort of this overarching goal to have more neutrality around climate pollutants. When is the time horizon for accomplishing that seems to be the bigger conversation today. There's not as much conversation around we should have that goal. The conversation today seems to be about when. Should we do it tomorrow? Should we by 2030, 2040, 2050? And there's these different time horizons. So as we start talking to the community about, hey, here's this interim report, part of that conversation has to be, what's the time horizon, right? 2030 is sooner than some of the building replacement obligations and sooner than some of the vehicle replacement obligations. They won't be in full swing yet, particularly on the heavy vehicle side for large trucks, large transportation. So there are a lot of layers to the onion about what we're trying to achieve. One of the aspects that has come up more recently is really saying, what does this goal mean in the context of what we're trying to do? What would be needed to even accomplish that by that time period? Is that realistic or not? It's not a good practice for governments to just put forward ideas and say that's what we're doing if there's not a realistic way of achieving that. You end up sort of misleading folks about whether you're going to accomplish that or you're trying to accomplish it. And it's okay to characterize as something as that we're trying to achieve something. But if you're telling folks we're adamant we're going to do X, Y, Z by this date, there becomes an expectation that you're going to do that by that date. And so is there clarity around that finality of that, achieving that goal by 2030 or not? And does the community even want us to do that? Because we're not even sure what would be required to actually do that in the case of American Canyon. But we know just inherently from even the studies that were done last fall, there's a lot of changes that would have to be. There's a lot of greenhouse gases currently being emitted that would either have to be offset or eliminated. And so is the community prepared to make the kinds of changes needed to go to that net zero goal or not? And again, that's a big, almost kind of esoteric conversation, and the council doesn't want that to get lost in the way of doing 2 or 3 of the smaller things while showing some progress. But that's what I said, was kind of left brain, right brain stuff. Like there's a couple of actionable things, but there's also a really big picture conversation that is needed too. So, there's a couple of ways that we can approach it. And what we wanted to at least conclude my remarks with was to talk about, it's the last attachment 6, which is 380 of your packet. But this kind of matrix takes the items that are identified in the draft interim report and gives an update on it, for lack of a better word. Some of the ideas are being implemented, or have different parts of it are being implemented, or some are just blank because they're not. So it was, again, not a final matrix of checkboxes, but it was a way of, we wanted to at least share the latest information with you all. So, there's a couple of ways that we can approach what is needed tonight. I think it will be important to signal back to the council how we're going to be trying to address both pathways, if you will. There's the bigger conversation pathway with the community, and then there's the smaller, 2 or 3 things. Yeah, I think we could do that. I think we could do that. And let's put those on the proverbial to-do list without much heartache, while also saying, hey, council, this is going to be our pathway for engaging the community on this much larger conversation. So, my recommendation, and I don't know if you've had an opportunity to review all of these materials, I'll profess I did not read all of the National Academy of Sciences report. I found it really intriguing, a very reputable source. I found it really intriguing. I didn't read all of it.
Look.
It's a book, yes, but I found it really intriguing, and so we kind of are going to have to start in one of two places. If we want to start and have the more broader conversation, we can do that. If we want to focus on okay, what are the things that have already been either box checked or are in the UA, and some of the simpler to-do items, we could start on that end of the spectrum. This conversation's not going to resolve tonight. We're not going to have all of the answers out of tonight, but being able to signal to the council how we're going to engage the public, what kind of outreach would be an important signal, and letting them know which of these items on this list are low-hanging fruitedness enough that we could accomplish them, I think would be another important signal. And my only last comment is, as we think about community engagement, it's great to see folks here tonight. We know this isn't the most popular place in the world for community engagement. We know there are, lots of other places where engagement can happen. So we're anticipating that engagement process is going to have to be out in the community as opposed to at 4381 Broadway. So we know that, but to put that on your radar, just because we're talking about a topic that some people are really interested in doesn't mean a bunch of people are going to come here and give you your perspective on it. We're probably going to have to go to them. And that's what I have. So I'll leave it up to any questions or thoughts, or how you want to proceed. Or we could entertain public comment at this point too. It's really up to the commission.
Okay, let's take public comment first, please.
Okay.
Chair, I want to acknowledge that we received the following public comment from Yvonne Baginski, Lynn Baker, Linda Brown, Jeanette Goyechi, Chris James, Lori Stelling, and Tammy Wong. If there's anyone in the audience that'd like to make a public comment, you can head towards the podium. Okay, good. Please state your name for the record.
Allison Bensick.
Thank you, Allison. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, good evening. My name's Allison Bensick. I know I have not yet met all of you, but a little bit about me is I'm an upcoming senior at American Canyon High School, and I am the co-president of Napa Schools for Climate Action, along with Liliana Koresh. The last time I was in this room, it was 4 years ago. I was 13, and I was asking for bike lanes around here, which is awesome to see, and I'm very proud of this community and this city. And for the past few years, Schools for Climate Action has been working on our fossil-free future project, and part of this project's end goal is to put a halt to new and expanded gas stations. First, we would really like to thank the City of American Canyon for supporting this cause. I'm so proud to come from a community that is willing to take action like this, and I will say that out loud all day, every day. And then tonight, we would like to request you in keeping our non-negotiable 2030 goal of net zero climate pollution. In American Canyon, like all other cities, it's critical that we drastically cut our climate pollution now. The detrimental effects of global warming are already affecting us in ways like severe droughts that affects us now, wildfires, natural disasters. And obviously, this is easier said than done, but with the courageous leadership that we have in this community and involvement with all the people around here, we know that it's possible. It's happened before. Our Napa Valley Unified School District adopted our Schools for Climate Action pledge, which in short states to tell the truth about the climate emergency and mobilize to stop it by or before 2030. Then recently, this spring, we had our Napa County Climate Challenge with the help of our American Canyon Ad Hoc Climate Committee. And we rallied students to spread awareness, to educate, and to work together to take part in climate action on a school-wide and a community-wide level. These previous successes are only the beginning of what our community in American Canyon is capable of. And to continue growing and flourishing as a strong and safe community, it's crucial that we have to work together and act now. So please continue to support our fight for the 2030 net zero climate pollution goal. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Allison. Please state your name for the record.
Linda Brown.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you. Do I have 3 minutes?
You do.
Thank you. I'll do my best. I actually wrote some comments. I'm going to kind of go through them. So I come from my company that I've helped start 39 years ago is an international leader in environmental and sustainability performance and certification work. We are an expert and internationally recognized expert in conducting greenhouse gas inventories and carbon footprinting and advancing climate accounting metrics that take into account the latest climate science. I'm here tonight for Napa Climate Now, a grassroots group that you've heard from before, made up of residents up and down the county of Napa, including folks here in American Canyon. And we all came together because we share a deep concern about the rapidly accelerating changes in climate. And our job and our hope is to work constructively with the public and private sectors to advance effective climate policy. We agree American Canyon has been a leader on climate positive initiatives as enumerated in the Agenda 4 document prepared by Mr. Holly for tonight's meeting. And we're thrilled with some of these very important efforts that have already been undertaken, but we all recognize that there's more work to be done. We fully support a concerted outreach and education effort to solicit feedback from the American Canyon residents and businesses as suggested by Mr. Holly and in the Agenda 4 document. Having served as a member on that ad hoc committee with council, convened by Council Member Joseph and Vice Mayor Washington, that put those 34 points that came out of that ad hoc committee, we believed strongly that there are certainly 2 or 3 projects and maybe half a dozen that could be selected as excellent demonstration projects from that list. This outreach and education effort must make clear to residents just exactly what is at stake, because we can't expect that everyone understands all the details of nuances of climate change. People are focused on just getting dinner on the table and getting to work and getting kids to school. But this climate crisis is devolving rapidly, as I'm sure you all read in just the past week. The Earth last month heated up to a level that it hasn't seen in 125,000 years last month. The coral reefs are sustaining major damage from oceans that are registering temperatures of 101 degrees, hot tub temperatures outside of Miami. The collapse of a major circulation current in the Atlantic Ocean was just reported in one of the major journals. That collapse, they've noted the first steps toward that collapse and are now projecting a collapse by mid-century. Closer to home, we already all know about the impacts of climate change on residents of American Canyon and Napa County. So we urge the council, through the commission's recommendation we're hoping for, to stand strong in support of an aggressive 2030 net zero goal. Net 30 is not a stretch goal.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else in the audience that would like to make a comment? Please go to the podium. Please state your name for the record.
I'm Jim Wilson, Napa, grandfather. It's good to be here again, see all the bikes. How do I do this? Jason covered a lot of this material as far as the background. You know, I just wanted to take it a little further back for just a minute. And this goes back to Rio in '92 and Kyoto in '97. This is when some of these original net zero, mid-century net zero concepts came up. It's when Nordhaus came up with a 2 degrees C. That's based on GDP and productivity of an economy. But really what we're talking about today isn't really, I hope it isn't so much political feasibility, but our problem is social acceptability, and this has to do with our leadership and the provision of services to get to the people who can't be here tonight to understand that we're in a climate emergency. And so we have the understanding now, I think, that the 2030 goal, net zero, goal is feasible. Technically, we have people in California who are ready to go. Their roadmaps are available. Napa Climate now provides 2030 roadmaps to the CAC, for example. And they are neighbors of ours: San Jose, Sacramento County, Davis, Irvine, the county of Sonoma, Petaluma. There's hundreds of cities around the world who have the same firm commitment that we have. But I want to talk about American Canyon briefly, and that's because of your climate emergency declaration in the form of a meat and bones resolution. Says, in part, as part of the resolution, that the city of American Canyon joins a growing list of communities committed to a goal of net zero climate pollution measured in terms of net contribution to excess trapped heat by or before 2030, and further commits to evaluate, this is where you come in, further commits to evaluate all planning and policy decisions through the lens of this 2030 pledge, okay? And to implement both immediate and sustained actions in support of its achievement. So it's been a year, as Jason says, since the council said, we're not ready to adopt this interim climate action plan, but let's engage the community. So the trick is how to accelerate this. And then also one other thing, the city council recognized in this declaration, resolution, the need for full community participation and support, commits to providing leadership and services, okay, in working with community organizations, businesses, schools, and regional partners and jurisdictions, Napa County, sister cities and town, to educate, mobilize, expand, and accelerate local, regional, and statewide support for comprehensive, immediate, and sustained action to achieve the goal of net zero climate pollution before 2030. And so I want to thank you for that powerful statement that led, I think, to the universal adoption of the 2030 net zero goal throughout the county.
Thank you, Jim. Is there anyone else in the audience who'd like to make a public comment? Please come to the podium.
Yes, Mark Joseph, speaking as a citizen in American Canyon. And I want to jump to a different issue, but on the subject of 2030, I think the strongest argument for preserving that is simply the sense of urgency that it implies. It's 7 years away. It isn't a lot of time. Now, by the same token, that's what makes it a more challenging objective. And I'm not even sure it can be accomplished, but I think it's important to preserve that deadline because it forces a sense of urgency that makes us all recognize we got to hurry up. And if we said 2050 is a more reasonable deadline, it also implies that we can take a deep breath, take our time, get distracted. And so for the sake of urgency, it may be prudent to stick with the 2030. We won't go to jail if we don't achieve it by 2030, but it is a worthy goal, and it helps to create that sense of urgency. Related to this is what I would like to offer as my pitch for one of the 2 or 3 low-hanging fruit. And that is what I've been calling and what the interim report refers to as the dashboard. Just a number of metrics that are illuminating as to how we're doing. How many electric vehicle registrations, the number of deep green accounts with MCE, solar installations, battery backups, and so on. All of those data points that are all readily available. And if we assemble them and look at them routinely, it will actually facilitate progress. For example, right now we might say, well, if we could switch to electric vehicles, that'll solve our problems, and it probably will. But I noticed a report today that indicated in the last year alone in California, electric vehicle sales increased almost 60% year over year, which is pretty dramatic, whereas solar installations probably hasn't been as great. By collecting that data routinely, and we start to see that electric vehicles are going sky high, you don't need to focus on that. In other words, the market is taking care of electric vehicles. You may look at the numbers and say, on the other hand, nobody's installing batteries, and that's what's urgent. Or no one's focusing on solar installations, or no one's getting onto the Napa Climate Challenge website. And so by getting those monthly data points or quarterly, you begin to look at that and it gives you insights on where you need to focus your energy. And that's how you enhance the success of moving ourselves to that net zero at 2030. So I really want to encourage you to look at that dashboard as a one of those 2 or 3 low-hanging fruits. I think it's easy to do. I don't think we want to do anything that means you start creating data. It's all readily available, and that's what I would encourage you to focus on. After that, sky's the limit. Go for all 30 if you want. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Remind me what number, item number that is?
I'm not sure, but it should be in the early numbers. And there's even a feeble effort to give you kind of a sample dashboard near the end of the report. I'm not sure what page it is. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, that's what I've been calling it. I'll have to go back in there. Basically, it is simply collecting the metrics. Oh.
I think it's similar to 24, but a different idea.
What
And
was-
it's something I don't know,
Yeah.
I
It
was
shows
hoping
up
we could have.
on page 23 of the staff report. I characterize it more as an overarching monitoring as a specific sort of
Yeah.
sub area. It talks about informational dashboard, public updates, and those sorts of things. So I would call it overarching as opposed to a specific
Okay.
sort of thing. So
Thank you.
The main thing is collect data so that you can monitor your success. Call it what you
you
want.
still get to pick 2 or 3 others.
And that's just one. Then you can pick 2 or 3 more.
Is there already a plan to collect the data and do the dashboard?
Not at the moment. I mean, there are a lot of things that we do. There are a lot of initiatives that are on our mind. There are a lot of tracking of metrics that are on our mind. There's not something specific in the works around sustainability. There's a lot of conversation we have around different performance indicators of what city services we provide. So I would say generally that's in the works, but nothing specific with some of the things mentioned. Although the topics that were mentioned were part of that overarching idea. I'm not. If that were the thing that the commission said, hey, let's do that. It seems pretty simple. I wouldn't wait on getting all of the other parts of the city that we're looking at tracking and dashboarding. I would let those catch up and just say, hey, we're gonna do some of these sustainably focused items, and it would, because maybe it's part of the theme as we're looking at some of this outreach, right? As we go to bring message to the community, visual displays are helpful, and so, I would characterize it as that was part of our strategy for connecting with the community and sharing this information. A dashboard would be useful. So waiting until the whole citywide dashboard is done might be a little while, and that wouldn't help the more immediate outreach effort. So I would bifurcate them. But just generally, yes, there is stuff in the works, but not tomorrow.
Thank you. No more comments?
Is there anybody else in the audience that'd like to make a public comment? Please come to the podium.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jeanette Goyech. I'm from American Canyon. I've been here for a long time.
Jeanette, would you mind pulling? Thank
This
you.
one?
Perfect.
I've been here for about 35 years, almost. I'm just here to recommend, I'm not a scientist, I'm just a person, but to recommend that the commission maintain the strong commitment to the 2030 net zero climate pollution goal. Like I said, I've been here a long time. I've watched a lot of changes. The wetlands have been, I guess, a wonderful thing, right? Everybody agrees to that, I think. And I would hate to see it go away, because it wasn't always the way it is, right? And I just want to make sure we're mindful of the development near the wetlands and around the wetlands and housing and things like that, that we take into account the existing habitats of animal and plant life before we build. I guess my concerns are with the diminishing open spaces, the increased traffic congestion, and I know we talked a lot about the traffic and the transportation, the horrible driving conditions, roadways, things like that, pollution from the trucks and all the cars. I don't think that's any secret that I have that. But I am proud of American Canyon, especially in regards to the wetlands preservation, and that's partly why I'm here, to recommend that we stick on the course of 2030. I don't think we should even think about, making it an option to go longer. I know that it might not happen, but I just want us to work towards just a real, it's a crisis. We all know that. I think we all feel it and we know it. And that's all I really have to say. Just thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Jeanette. Is there anybody else in the audience that'd like to make a public comment? We do have 3 people in the Zoom audience. If you'd like to make a public comment, please raise your hand. Hi, Carlotta. Can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you please state your name for the record?
Yes. Hi, this is Carlota Sainado with the Napa County Bicycle Coalition. Thank you for having this conversation, for taking public comment. My comments kind of have 2 general perspectives. So the first is that it's a bit unclear what the commission's being asked with this item. In the agenda item and the documents, it sounds like the commission is really being asked to solicit feedback from residents and identify action plans to do this community outreach and project plans. And the Bicycle Coalition has been a voice as this commission has developed its sort of scope and changed into the OSATS format it's in now. And so we just want to kind of remind that this commission is really well prepared to be, it is an advisory commission. It's well prepared to provide input and give advice, but it is not a working commission. It would be pretty limited in the work it can do on actual community input solicitation, things that are more appropriate for the city or a consultant to do. They would have more resources, they're more well equipped. So I think I just wanted to remind that. It sounds like from what Mr. Hawley was saying earlier now that it might be more of just a conversation during this meeting, so that, that would be appropriate. It was just a little unclear to me. And then moving forward, looking at actions that the city can take, I really advocate, the Bicycle Coalition advocates for implementing the bicycle plan and leaving room to even go beyond the bicycle plan where we know it's appropriate and where we know it would create a low stress network. We've learned a lot since the bike plan was developed and approved in 2019, particularly around protected bike lanes, how that reduces the likelihood for crashes, how that helps all road users, and developing that political will to prioritize active transportation. We still regularly run into appropriate bicycle facilities not being implemented due to, parking or prioritizing vehicles, which we know is the least climate friendly way to get around. Even if they are electric vehicles, bicycle emissions from their life cycle are 10 times lower than electric vehicles. A recent study concluded that active transportation should be a cornerstone of any sustainability initiative. And so we'd really like to see that actually be prioritized as we are building out, repaving streets, building new streets. So that is one that we would strongly recommend be one of those projects that the city works on immediately as they're doing their community input. And the Bicycle Coalition
is always here to have a conversation about that. So please do feel free to reach out anytime. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Chair, that looks like all the public comment we have at this time.
Okay, thank you. So, just to be clear, we are tasked with picking some low-hanging fruit tonight, right? What are we saying about community engagement? Are we kind of coming up with ways we're going to do that tonight?
Yeah, that would be our recommendation. We don't need to set dates and times necessarily, but some discussion about how to engage the community and what we're going to engage them on. One of the things that strikes me, and I do think we ought to dive into the list here in attachment 6 and kind of talk through some of the low-hanging fruit there. One of the things that strikes me is that I don't know that we have, and I know has been mentioned certain roadmaps and such, but I don't think American Canyon has a roadmap to 2030. And if there is this collective desire to stay on that mark, whether for appearances of urgency or actually trying to get it done and not wanting to give up on it, I don't know what that roadmap is. Maybe others do, but even to Carlotta's point, there's some expertise that might be needed, and I'm sure we don't have it on staff. So one of the things that's on my mind is thinking about engaging the folks that helped do the countywide study and just kind of get their thoughts on, can we put them on retainer? Can we bring them into the conversation a little bit? What would American Canyon's roadmap to be, right? In order, they did our forecast for 2030 with the business as usual case. What would be the net zero case, right? What would it take to do that? So I think coming up with ideas on how to engage the community, I certainly want to talk through that. But what are we engaging them on? I don't know the answer to that because I don't know that we know what that roadmap is, right? How many less vehicles are in American Canyon when we're doing that? How many less gas appliances are in American Canyon? How much has the lifestyle changed? I don't think we can answer that question yet. And I think we have to know what that roadmap at least sort of looks like before that would be the content of that presentation, right? As we're trying to engage the community, this is our goal of 2030. Here's what would have to change to get us there. And so I think we don't have that information. I think we'd have to get to it before we could implement our engagement process, but we could certainly talk about how we might engage the community. Is it surveys? The high school has been a great partner. I'm sure we need to be into the school and engaging that part of the community and their parents. So, using your kind of collective experiences, what are some examples of really galvanizing a broad support once we know what that roadmap might be? And again, that's probably the second part of our conversation, but the first part is, of these 33 items that were here, are there any questions with the update staff provided? Are there any things that go, geez, Jason, that seems kind of obvious. Can we do that? And maybe kind of go through it that way, and we can kind of land on 2 or 3, and then we can start this conversation about how should we engage the community and how might we develop the content to engage them on?
Okay. Didn't one of the audience members from Climate Action Now mention that there's a roadmap?
Yeah, there were some comments around that the state has some roadmaps. Some other jurisdictions have roadmaps. They're the roadmaps that I've looked at and seen are very, very broad. They are very, very almost aspirational in that sense. They're not that specific. And so I would be looking, before we went to the community and said, would you support this? I wouldn't be asking them to support an aspirational document. I would be asking them to say X, Y, and Z are going to change. It's for the benefit. Here are the reasons why. And I think we would need to also establish the urgency and the reasons why. It can't just be, do you want to make these changes? There has to be a justification, of course, as to why we need to do that. But I would want to have that roadmap be American Canyon specific as opposed to here's what Santa Rosa is doing or here's what the state's going, because I don't think that at all will resonate with our community. So there are roadmaps out there. We've looked at some of those. There is not an American Canyon roadmap.
Okay. Okay, so just to try to organize this discussion a little bit, I think we should start on the initiatives, and if can we be more broad?
Can we start on some comments?
Can we start on some?
I haven't had
minutes?
some comments. I haven't had a chance to ask questions or comment yet.
I have a bunch of really broad questions, so I think it might help if we get a chance to ask broad first and then Okay.
Well, I kind of don't want to be bouncing around from subject to subject, because I think it's going to get complicated.
Bouncing if we get to ask general questions before we get to this list. Because you're suggesting we start with the list?
Otherwise, we're kind of being told
So I
what
was
to
gonna
do rather
say,
than,
to ask questions about the initiatives specifically.
You're talking about the list of 34?
Right, the list of 34, as Jason suggested. And then we can move on to the next thing from there.
I
Is
have a
your-
question about the whole, I mean, going back to the initial comments, I had questions on Jason's initial comments that I wanted to ask before we even got into all the specifics. So I'd like to make some comments, please.
I have some general comments that don't get into the weeds.
Okay, and you have comments too. Okay. Okay, I'm going to start with Commissioner Artis, because his light was on earlier at first.
Thanks, Commissioner, or City Manager Hawley. I did have a question that was broad in the beginning when you were talking, and it's on page 11. It says that the 2022 Climate Emergency Resolution identifies a goal of net zero GHG emissions by 2030. Notwithstanding this local goal, most future GHG emission reductions are forecast to occur in the building and transportation sectors, of which American Canyon has little or no control. Understandably, as a report by the National Academy of Sciences outlines, many experts are focused achieving the net zero standard by 2050 instead. So does this, I'm just trying to get at the heart of why why there's a potential change from 2030 to 2050, and is that what you were talking about, that maybe there is no roadmap at this point? Is there budget considerations to look at, and also is this potentially that we're seeing that there's going to be an automatic reduction with transportation, and so that maybe some of the stuff to be able to meet some of those goals are not necessary at that point? And if so, does that mean that there's an opportunity to actually address maybe something beyond what is the low-hanging fruit or what is actually needed? So maybe is this the time to address difficult decisions as opposed to, say, the low-hanging fruit? And this could be like a hazardous materials analogy, where there's a spill, you don't just start cleaning it up, but you actually plug and stop the leak before you actually do the cleanup. So are we at a point where we're doing cleanup as opposed to stopping the leak that's actually happening? And so should we be actually instead stepping even further back if we want to meet those city goals and those council goals, and looking or taking a hard look at throttling growth to ensure adherence to our city's emergency climate plan?
Yeah, good questions. A lot to sort through there. And what I'm trying to do now is kind of put myself back into what I think the council is interested in this, as they've delegated these ideas to you. It's clear they're interested in knowing a couple of actionable things right now. Like there's a couple of things they want to point to, a couple of things that are going to be underway or happening. And it's also clear that there's a much bigger conversation to happen, and they don't want the low-hanging fruit, to wait until that bigger conversation unfolds. So that I'm pretty clear on. The purpose of that paragraph was really to acknowledge at the time that the interim report was prepared, they didn't have the benefit of the countywide reports that have been prepared, and now we do. And what those countywide reports show, building, energy, and transportation are the two biggest sectors. And in the transportation sector, one of the largest pieces is around heavy vehicles, for example. And even in passenger vehicles, very little that American Canyon could do to change whether those vehicles are electrified or not. We don't regulate policy at that level. It's done at the national level and at the state level. So we wanted to acknowledge that those things hadn't been figured out. And it's the same thing, a little bit different on the energy side, probably a little more control on the energy side, at least as it relates to gas appliances, but to acknowledge the impending regulations from the Bay Area Air Quality District, which are, my understanding, 2 or 3 years away as it relates to new appliances and things. And the state building code is not far along. So could we adopt something tomorrow? Sure. the effect of that would only be 2 years worth of an effect because those other regulations are coming down the pike. The analogy for me on that actually relates to the plastic bag ordinance that we had. We went through there was a region-wide and then a statewide effort on plastic bags. We went through a lot of effort locally, coming up with enforcement mechanisms, engaging the community, and about 4 months later, before the statewide one or the region-wide one took effect, we did ours. And so there was a period of 4 months where we had a local ordinance, and then 4 months later, it was for everybody, right? So that you go, okay, what's the value of that effort? It's of being 4 months early, right? I think is part of that conversation, and that's what I was trying to get to there too. So what is the value of being 2 years early, for example, on an all-electric reach code, right? There's some value in it, but if it's coming down the pike, of which, you know, will we get challenged? Do we enforce it? All of those aspects play into that conversation. There are some other specific things that we have a lot more control on. And so, particularly in the areas of like water conservation, for example, so much of our energy demand is around importation of water. Food diversion is another big thing, although there's some new regulatory schemes there. The operationalizing of those regulatory schemes is something we're still playing out right now, and there's a lot of opportunity locally to do that. So I think that's where some of that comes. And it really also wanted to bring in some of the other areas to show what other folks are looking at. Again, National Academy of Sciences is looking at the national picture of this. It's not focused on American Canyon, but they're looking at this more national picture, and to say that there are other numbers out there, there are other focuses and other runways. So that was the purpose of that paragraph, to kind of bring in those other thoughts. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah. Thank you. And also, I just had some kind of general as we lead into the bullet point, the 34 points, is that especially here in American Canyon, you know, we have our grasslands that surround us and the vegetation type conversions that are occurring now, and they will continue just with climate change that's happening. We're presently seeing even some of these transitions from native pines and conifers in these higher altitudes, and it's going down into lower altitude hardwood trees. And so although these changes will occur gradually and there will be many in between transitions, the fact is that grassland is more likely to survive than forest in warmer, a drier climate in the long run. But our grasslands should be protected and conserved as these critical open spaces for innumerable wildlife, and it's just a general ecosystem function. So as we go down the road of carbon mitigation and even sequestration and combating GHG and our potential 2030 target, I think it's important to ensure we do not manage a system into accelerated transitions or solely rely on measures that will detract from the preservation of our naturally occurring areas that are around us, including those wetlands. Especially in urbanized environments, I mean, some of the points that we can find ourselves sandwiched, you know, we have the Newell open space, we have the wetlands, we have some forested areas, and I think we should increase tree canopies and street line projects, but not at the expense, I think, of prioritizing the protection of our surrounding natural areas or increased opportunities to ensure those intact corridors remain and are stable for wildlife, plant life, all of that there. And we really want to accentuate those systems. And in conjunction, I think we can even capitalize on a system of unintentional reserves, such as landfills and medians that are being used by wildlife people, or even some of the measures that we talk about for greenhouse gases. And so as we look at tree planting efforts and things like that, but they should make sure that we're avoiding areas that are undergoing already natural habitat regeneration, where tree planting is unnecessary or maybe ecologically harmful to those systems. And even like in recent statewide analysis in California, researchers estimate that there's 16 to 23 metric tons of carbon per acre in soil organic carbon stocks in grasslands and grazing lands, and even more depending on the species makeup or the conditions of that particular site. Thus, I think we should make sure that upcoming and future land use decisions made in the first place, again, this is getting back to where we're at now, do not exacerbate climate change. We're looking at worthy objectives and opportunities to achieve reductions based on growth and projections, but it's critically important, and this is, again, the hazardous materials spill analogy, that we don't focus on just the cleanup until we plug, or in this case, realistically manage the leak in the first place. And so this is, I think, where we really need to look at the impacts to biodiversity, wildlife connectivity, access to open space, wildfire risk, and climate resiliency, and really look at our nature-based system opportunities to strengthen those efforts. And where we can fight climate change. And at a minimum, this is strategic land use planning decisions at this stage. This is ensuring that during the development approval process, climate impacts from habitat loss is fully considered. It's during environmental reviews with CEQA. It should include comprehensive and accurate accounting of carbon storage and sequestration loss from the destruction of American Canyon habitats and open space if it's not done so already. And that means, GHG emission reductions from protecting habitat are used for meeting regulatory or permitting requirements. We should ensure that those mitigation measures are real, permanent, quantifiable, verifiable, and even enforceable at this point, because otherwise then it doesn't make any sense. And there should be evidence that shows GHG emission reductions would not have occurred in the absence of those mitigation measures. So I think promoting the conservation of existing intact, connected local habitats as a viable mitigation strategy should be a priority, and is at the top of the food chain for this. And is not only that, it's just a benefit for human, wildlife residents and visitors here, the aesthetic value, as well as meeting the biological needs. So I think we sometimes are losing the top of the pyramid, and we're focusing on a lot of those low-hanging things that are comprising the base when our pyramid should be flipped up. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Commissioner Mattson, sorry, my
Yeah.
mic was off.
Okay. I had some, this is a really good conversation, and I'm really glad we talked about the roadmap, because that's been my main question, is we have this wonderful list, but what's the impact of these items? So I'd like to know, I think Jim mentioned roadmaps, you mentioned roadmaps. It'd be nice to get a list of cities with roadmaps that we could maybe look at. So I feel like before we go to the community and engage the community, we need to provide the community with enough information. And I think it was April, you guys came and talked to us. I was like, so what do we do with this list? And my career was energy efficiency and conservation, and if I'm stumbling, we're all going to stumble. So that was one question I had, was how can we get there? And then the public comments that I read this afternoon, when everybody's talking, let's stick to the net zero in 2030, I started thinking about that some more, and then I realized what you'd written in the staff report, and I see why they're saying that, and can we get there? And I want to. One question that Carlotta brought up was focusing on our existing climate-oriented projects, and I asked before kind of what the city's doing. Do we have some projects we're working on now that we should be focusing on as well? I'm not want to stop the train. I just want to know where we are as a city government, what the city government's doing, and I think it'll help inform the community about that. And then I went through the meeting package for the county meeting, and they brought up I'm not sure whose presentation it was, but they talked about the idea of a one-stop shop, and I've been thinking, if we're going to help our residents make changes, there's rebates, there's opportunities, there's ways to analyze solar. And by the way, we don't have solar on our house yet, and that's as a degree in solar engineering, it's kind of embarrassing, but we need to provide a way for our residents to easily do these things, because there's so many demands on our lives. Publicity about rebates and opportunities. I like the idea of a consultant. If we don't have city staff and we don't have the bandwidth to do this analysis, I think it's going to be helpful. So I hope I stayed at a general level. I like the dashboard being filled out. I think that provides information for the where are we, and where are we trying to get to, and it's all something we can use to move us forward. And I believe those were all my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just real quick, the notion of consultant isn't necessarily about bandwidth per se. It's really about expertise. As I read the reports and listen to it, that's some very technical information that we don't just have as opposed. I mean, there are bandwidth issues, of course, too, but it is also about the technical side.
Commissioner Christian?
Thank you. Under the introduction and background, the second bullet point is evaluate planning and policy decisions through the lens of this pledge. And that was the climate, council adopts climate emergency resolution. So is that a one-time inspection or analysis of the city's planning and policies? Or is that an ongoing thing that from this day forward, that city council will evaluate planning and policy decisions through the lens of this pledge so that it affects everything? That's my first question.
Could you reframe it for me, Barry?
Yeah,
Or
sorry.
Commissioner Christian, I don't quite understand your question.
It just says, under the introduction and background, the council adopts the climate emergency resolution.
Page 27.
Page 27.
I was on page 14, sorry. Maybe I'll get on the right page first. Sorry. I was on the actual resolution. Okay.
So one is net zero climate pollutants by 2030. Number two is evaluate planning and policy decisions through the lens of this pledge. And number three, established an ad hoc climate action committee to develop an action plan. So under the number two, evaluating planning and policy decisions, are we doing that? Like, let's take a look at all the city's planning policies and check everything? Or does this mean that from this day forward, whenever city council looks at anything, they're going to evaluate it through the lens of this climate pledge? I'm trying to figure out what that sentence actually means.
That's a really great question, Commissioner Christian. And, to be totally candid, I don't think there's great clarity on the answer to that. I think it's one of those things that is well-intentioned, but in order to evaluate something against something else, you kind of have to have either a baseline or a comparison, right? Absent a roadmap of what American Canyon Net Zero 2030 is, I don't think there's a way you can compare against that. And so, it's something we're aware of. It's something I think that we do. I think we implement a lot of the ideas that have already been created and other ideas that will help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And that's an overarching goal that we have and do. To say that we examine every policy, every goal, every staff report, every resolution to say whether or not this will help us achieve XYZ by 2030 or not, it's not that explicit. And I think that's where the rub has been, quite frankly, over the last year and a half. I think there are some who say that's an explicit standard. It's a black and white sort of yes-no question. I don't think it is, because I don't know, you can't have a yes-no question unless you're comparing it to something, and I don't think we have that comparison thing to compare against. That's where the rub, and that's where the bigger conversation.
So we don't have enough data to be making those decisions?
I don't think it's, I think sure.
Partially.
One part data, certainly one part data, one part, as I've been preparing for this item for a bit now and trying to sort it out. It's not that simple. I think the absence of a roadmap is one of the glaring holes that we have. We have a list of great ideas that people come up with. No idea if we did all of those ideas, whether we would get to that goal that was set on 2030. There is no causal relationship between the two, and whether the 2030 idea is even achievable, I don't know, it hasn't been established. And so we don't have an explicit standard that says this activity that the council is going to take a discretionary action on will increase the probability of achieving that goal by 2030 or decrease the probability of achieving by 2030. We don't view it through that strict lens.
Okay, and I want to thank Carlota Sainato for her comments, because I was thinking, I had the same questions that Ms. Sainato did. The recommendation for today is develop a community engagement draft 22 climate action plan. So I'm wondering, are we developing a climate action plan? Or are we developing a community engagement process? Or are we doing both? To me, it seems really muddled.
I have to apologize. There's some words missing from that recommendation, and I'm not exactly sure how they dropped out. The point of today, the recommendation for today, is twofold. It's to identify 2 or 3 of those items of the 34 that are pretty simple. Let's do those. And develop a plan for engaging the community. We're not developing the climate action plan. We're developing an idea or a sequence or a strategy, however you want to call it, for engaging the community. Would this be a series of public meetings, a series of surveys? Who might the target audiences be? How do we engage target audiences that are not historically engaged, non-English speakers, for example? How do we engage important parts of this community who probably aren't engaged on this issue, but the council wants them engaged on this issue? So that's, I apologize for the poor wording of the recommendation. It's not even a complete sentence.
There's a lot of community engagement involved in what we're being asked to do.
Correct.
Okay, and I think Ms. Sinato's point was maybe that's not specifically a great fit for what we're here to do. I don't know. But does it also mean we're not developing a climate action plan itself, or are we developing a climate action plan at the same time that we're doing this community engagement?
What the council was presented with was this interim report of 34 ideas. They didn't adopt the report because they felt like the community wasn't engaged on it. The way I would characterize, I think, your question, Commissioner Christian, I take it to mean, can we add things, can we change things, and so forth, and what's already been prepared. As the council handed off from the committee to this body sustainability issues, they didn't want the recreation of the wheel. They said there's already been a great body of work done by the ad hoc committee. Take their playbook, run with it. Now, that's not absolute to say you can't have your own good ideas to tweak or add, but they did not want to go through or recreate the wheel process. So, I would say there's some flexibility to add, or there may be some things in here that don't align. So, some touches around the margin, but they, and with all respect to the commenters, the council views this body as a good body to engage the public, but there are going to be other means as well.
Yeah, so I guess my comment on that specifically would be, I'm not sure what we're doing, what the focus is. It doesn't sound like we're developing a climate action plan because, as you say, there's been a lot of work done already. Maybe we're developing a process to engage the community.
Correct. That's a better way of phrasing it.
It almost asks, but for me, it's otherwise it's asking for a plan. City Council's asking for a plan, but they're wondering if the community supports it. So what I'm thinking about is, if Chief Greenberg told us, well, we've got a rash of car burglaries or crashes or what, you're not going to go out to the community and say, look, we want to engage you on whether we should stop these car burglaries or not. You're going to do what you can to stop it. When we got public access to the Newell Preserve and the wetlands, we didn't go out and do this big public engagement process to see if the citizens wanted that or would support it. So it seems to me that it's a question of City Council doing the right thing. If they feel that this is important, and it seems like they do, then they want a plan. But in terms of engaging the community, it's really difficult to engage the community. I think we lost a great opportunity with the Meet Me in the Streets. We could have had a booth out there all three of those times. There's tons of people. I've knocked on doors. I learned from Mark Joseph and Leon that, when you're campaigning for something.
Could we talk about the community engagement as a whole piece together?
We're going to talk about that separately.
Mm-hmm. Is that okay with you?
We're
going to come back to that.
I had these questions at the beginning, and I went through listening to everybody, the public comment, all your comments, trying to hold on to that thought, and it gets a little scattered. So if I could just get out what I want to say here, these questions, that would help me be better focused, I think. And I hope I'm not going on too long, but everybody else has had a pretty good chance to speak.
Don't forget to use your button when you want to speak, please. It'll help me.
So I don't know that we need to go out and ask the community, do you support this? I don't know if they're going to even know. There aren't a lot of, we've got great people here, great advocates that have studied this and did the work to come in here and advocate, and that's terrific. We need that. But if I go out to the grocery store and start stopping people, well, do you think we should have electric vehicles in this? It's just, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how that even works. It just, and so if we want a plan, I think I could help with that. But in terms of trying to find out if the community supports your plan, I don't know if we can even find out. And I didn't know that it's necessary. I know one thing, when you piss people off, they'll show up here and tell you they're mad. So if you tell them you can't drive your gas-powered car anymore, okay, they're going to come in here and tell you what they think. But if you try to go out and talk to them, I don't know. So I'm skeptical of that. And with the focusing on the three issues, I feel like I'm at a lunch buffet trying to pick the daily special. You know, you get one of these and two sides. It's just like, if we want to do this, let's do as many as we can. And let's do the easier ones first and work on the harder ones. But we've got a great list of all the things that we could be doing. Why would we just say, okay, we'll just pick three and then next year we'll look, if it's important. I don't know why city council just says, hey, this is important, we want to do it, we want to plan. And so I'm just kind of confused about that. And in terms of what Scott was talking about, I agree totally with we've lost our uplands. That's where everybody builds. That's the part of open space that we've lost. We have the hillsides, but you lose the uplands and you lose a whole specific fauna and group of animals that's where they live. And one thing City of American Canyon has really never done is looked at open space in terms of, are we going to go and buy some open space? Are we going to preserve it? Are we going to have park development impact fees, so we put that money away and actually keep some open space? And so I'm all in favor of finding that open space, and I think the volunteers have demonstrated we can plant a lot of trees with volunteers. Shalon Zudi fenced in the mitigation pond for red-legged frog that the city dug, and she used the city staff and some volunteers to build the fence. We had a community planting days. The trees are all up there. That's working out okay. And she asked me, can you water it? I said, I've got too much already. She went and got the scout troops to come up to Newell and water. It's a section called Scout Section. And for 2 or 3 years, they came up there and hand watered trees that I would have been watering. So we can do those kinds of things. It just takes a little will and some leadership. Thank you.
I believe there's a question from the audience. Linda? Sorry.
Go over to the mic.
You want to reopen public comment? You can.
Yes.
No, I mean, you're the chair. It's one of the powers of being the chair. If you want to reopen public comment, we just, for the record, we say we reopen the public comment and invite the audience to come back up.
Thank you.
I had just thought while you were responding to a question that it was important to reiterate that the ad hoc committee, met during COVID. It was under, more difficult circumstances, but we were definitely Zooming everything. And our task as an ad hoc committee was to kind of start this process along and start it and take it as far as we could with volunteers with no resources. And then it was presented by Council Member Joseph to the City Council. So had we had some resources or more time, I think that we could have continued down this road of finding ways to suggest metrics and more of a roadmap and more planning around this. So I apologize that we weren't able to take it that far. I do think that there is more information now available that could be brought to bear. I guess I have to agree with Commissioner Christian that, and I alluded to this in my own comments, that it might be putting the horse before the cart to ask the community about things that they may not be well equipped to respond to yet. But I do want to say that there was a very successful effort at an initial outreach through the schools, and other people here are better equipped to speak to that than I am. But in that outreach effort, the schools were very, school populations, the students were very, very engaged in learning about how they could improve their climate footprints, their carbon footprints, and what actions and opportunities were available to them. So I know that at least from that outreach and education example, that there was some success within this community in raising these issues and getting feedback and seeing what the response would be. And I think that they were challenged. It was a challenge to see how much they could improve. And the winning team got a pizza dinner. Was that right? So it's not that it's impossible to go out. And that was just one idea, because it was a way to have a population together in an education and outreach format. But the idea, too, was that the students would take that back to their homes and their parents and to their households. And so it was a very interesting example of creative outreach with limited resources.
And I just want to be clear, I think outreach is really important, and I think that's a great part of this that we can do. But going out to survey people, that's where I have a little, and I think you put it well. Thank you.
Okay, so we're closing
Close
public comment.
comments if you would like, yes.
All right. Commissioner Mattson?
This is really short. I think that Climate Action Now did a survey at Earth Day in American Canyon, but we never saw the survey instrument or the results. And so I'm hoping you can send those to Jason so he can share them with us, because that would be helpful. Totally unrelated, but I just thought of it. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so does anybody have questions on the initiatives for Jason? I'll start with a question. Item 32, reduce methane leaks. This one doesn't have any comments on it. Are we aware of methane leaks in our system?
No. This was an area we didn't have much idea or look much into. I think there were some supplemental reports on short-term pollutants that the countywide committee had received. The short answer is no. I suppose the landfill, although that isn't in our jurisdiction, the landfill might be, of course, the large source, but short answer is no. So
I would think this is maybe something like PG&E would know or track.
it would require us to dig a little bit deeper and figure out what was intended there. What did the short-lived climate pollutants, short-lived pollutant study talk about? And it wasn't an area of familiarity, and that's why it's blank.
Okay. The initiatives are on page 380 to 382, if anybody is looking for them.
380, 381, and 382.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I also had received an email from MCE about to provide a presentation. We haven't had that yet, but I understand that there may be some rebates or different things available. That kind of information, I think, would be helpful in this, to know what kind of things are out there. To choose for low-hanging fruit. But number 17, increase the percentage of deep green customers.
Yeah, that refers to MCE. The term deep green is one of their classification of customers, and I'm frantically searching through one of the forecasts that identified the this exact. I'm gonna go to my notes. I didn't write down which page it was on, but in the forecast, the greenhouse gas study that was done last fall, they calculated how many customers are using PG&E, how many customers are using MCE. Of those MCE customers, how many of them are light green versus deep green. When MCE came online, customers had a choice to make. If they elected to do nothing, they were automatically enrolled into light green. If they chose to go to PG&E, then they would put in the PG&E program, or if they opted into the deep green, they would be opted into the deep green. I want to say about 75% of the customers were just in the light green, and a very small percentage were in the deep green. I'll see if I can find that in the report, unless you found the page.
I have the answer in their presentation on Friday to the county. It was about 10% are deep green, I assume for Napa County, 9.6 right?
But I think American
Jim's telling me
Canyons.
I'm off by 0.4,
Yeah,
lower than that?
I think we might want to.
That was 9.6.
If you'd like to open it up, I can help clarify. One of the interesting things we discovered,
Don't I have to reopen it first?
or you can just say, hey, this
Reopening public
guy,
comment.
there we go. Or somebody just refused to follow the protocols and you
It is,
didn't have the
it is on
police.
page 97 of the packet.
The important thing is that MCE has kind of changed the game plan. And instead of saying you can opt in for light green, the default is the deep green. And which explains why the deep green percentages have started to
That's if you come
climb.
as a new customer.
Right. So if it used to be everybody opted in at the light green and then nobody had a problem. Now any new customer is opted in at the deep green. And the question was, is there getting any pushback? And the answer was no, not really, because, they try to be somewhat competitive with PG&E's rates. So the good news out of all of that is the deep green customer count is going to start creeping up significantly as we, kind of, reset all of our customer base over time. So that's some good news on that front.
Yeah. I'd like,
Apologize for butting in.
no problem. Closing public comment again. I would like to add my own experience on the deep green. So as a result of this, the climate action plan, I started trying to implement some of the things on my own. And so I went on PG's website a few months ago. I already do have solar, but I converted over to the deep green. And this month I received email that gave me a statement of what it would have been if I had stayed where I was at in PG&E. And if I was light green and deep green, like the cost, it was like less than $2 doing deep green. Yeah. So to me, this really stands out as easy, low cost, and I think it's something that we could get the word out pretty easily. I mean, advertise. I mean, I don't know exactly how we get the word out, but I mean,
I think I'm looking at a spokesperson right now.
I think this, yeah.
Well, no, I jest, but I should take a step back as we talk about engagement. I think maybe Commissioner Christian, you had leapt into this idea of standing in front of Safeway saying your life's going to be over. Are you okay with that for doing all these sustainability things and getting a negative response? Sometimes our engagement tools are more measured and more balanced, and sometimes we lay the groundwork for ideas, not in just a wholesale everything's changing, do you like it or not, but in, like I said, a more measured, balanced approach. So what I might just take that tape recording, we might make a video of it. And I only joke, but as the chair of this body, for example, what I think one of the low-hanging fruits in here would be to get a lot more customers, because only 2 or 3% of American Canyon customers are deep green. For your own experience, there's not much financial difference. The process to switch to deep green, I'm guessing, was a few clicks on a computer mouse. It didn't involve a building inspection. It didn't involve anything from the city, so far as I can tell. Hard to be much simpler than that. Yeah. So communicating that. So some of the things we can do, if you start thinking about the things through the lens of engagement, would be testimonials, right? Video testimonials. The chair of this commission talking about a very simple task that all American Canyon residents can do and share your own experience, and we can broadcast that on our social media channels, in our different communication platforms. And that's a form of engagement that's laying the groundwork for other kinds of engagement and other bigger topics. But one factoid I would like to try and figure out before we would do that, for example, is if all of the customers in American Canyon went to deep green, what does that look? What does that greenhouse gas picture look like, right? Like to again paint that justification picture is to say, you're one of 5,500 accounts probably that are in the city, but you took a very simple action. It cost you $2, and look at all the greenhouse gas savings that happen. So that can be in both an outreach strategy, it can be at the testimonial, but it can also get into the factual piece of how that might move the needle if everybody else joined you in doing that.
Is that information that PG&E or MCE could provide us?
Not sure. I'm guessing MCE could probably help with that answer. If not, I'm going to pick up the phone and call these people, the consultants, and ask them. So see how much free information I can get before I have to put them on retainer.
I remember when we first got the deal to be able to use MCE as an energy source or provider I'm not sure what the terminology is, but I had a long conversation with PG&E trying to figure out what would be the cost differential, and a long conversation with MCE. And it was so hard because they do their billing differently. And it wasn't until I saw this email and saw, well, there's the comparison right there, and it's that easy. Yeah.
And you probably have the bills, right? And we can redact your address, but
Yeah.
like, I mean, that's, we're finding in the world of community engagement, and you can blame social media or whatever, but real world testimonials from public figures, resonate. And so, that's the kind of thing that was very simple. When magnified times 5,500 can be impactful, and can lay the groundwork as a strategy tool.
At the symposium you spoke at Napa Valley College, they had a MCE Green representative there. It sounded like they were very much open to public input and working with the community.
Very much, and they'll be the first source I go to say, how do I calculate the benefit of everybody doing this?
Does anybody else have a initiative that they'd like to propose?
Oh, it wasn't an initiative I proposed.
Yeah.
I was just confused why, maybe it was just, there were two places to put it, the number 22, feasibility lowered greenhouse gas concrete. Was it because it's in the renewables section, and I get saving energy and, I mean, isn't that, where does it go? Does it go in buildings? It just seemed like it was just in a strange place to me. Do you guys remember? Oh, we'd have to open up public comment to ask that question. It's not the end of the world
Yeah, I
for
mean,
me
I
to
don't know
answer this question.
the category in which one of these might apply. I don't know that matters a whole bunch. I mean, the point of that was to identify the fact that there are newer technology. Concrete is a pretty GHG intensive building material. If you're looking at GHG through a life cycle perspective, it's a little bit not as bad because of how long it lasts, but its creation, in particular cement, but aggregate as well, the mining of that, I mean, those are not, they have a footprint. And so the point of that is there can be ways to specify, less intrusive forms of concrete, but that was the point of it. I don't know which category per se that matters, but.
On number 27, the
Hey, hold
preserve.
on. Commissioner Matt Ardis has his light on.
I had a question, and I'm not necessarily advocating, and this is one that we do, but number 6, which is track local employment by home, city, and or, I guess, remote work. But wouldn't having this information play into an understanding of, I guess, the modeling of what transportation reduction is ultimately going to have over between now and 2030, and or does that inform or help inform city council or planning department when looking at projects, or what types of businesses or licenses or things or attraction of businesses that we want to bring to the city, based on what kind of jobs are those going to be? Are those going to be ones that are going to attract people who are going to be able to do that, or work from home, or certain professional levels and things like that? And so, where does that fall then on a priority list that informs or spiderwebs out to informs a bunch of different things?
Yeah, generally you're right that the information could be useful in some decision-making manner that the council might be engaged in. They're often presented with, ideas or claims from developers about their local hire practices, and there's also concepts around employment and reducing vehicle miles traveled associated with employment. One of the things that strikes me about this list is there are some things that you point to and you go, do X, Y happens, right? If 20 or 30 or 50% of the customers go from light green to deep green, you can probably figure out what a greenhouse gas thing. This one is a lot more nebulous in the sense of it could spiderweb out, as you said, into some potential policy making. It's also a little challenging because I don't exactly know how we're going to operationalize that. By zip code seems the least privacy invasive one, but the 94558 is a pretty big zip code, and I don't know the zip code in Fairfield, but there are some areas that are mileage-wise not that far away from American Canyon, but you wouldn't know that on a zip code basis. And so it's a lot of the data that came from the greenhouse gas study that was done was done through cell phone collected transportation data, and they do that already, and that points to different travel patterns. It points to employment things. So it's one subset of the data, but it's not all of it, and it particularly doesn't get into the question of economic development. As we look at different projects that might come to the city, can we create job centers that reduce VMT? So that's the idea behind some of that idea is can we gather information and then use it? I would call it more of an indirect effect necessarily on GHD as opposed to sort of that direct connection, but that's the idea, yes.
If we wanted some starter information for that, is that something, do you think that we could ask our Chamber of Commerce to compile? Maybe they already have some of that data.
I'm sure the chamber doesn't have the data. Whether they would be willing to ask their members to collect it of their employees, I don't know if they'd be willing to ask, and we would be pretty hard pressed to impose it. We do have business license processes, and we've, contemplated the idea of requiring or asking maybe for that information in a business license process. Businesses are pretty sensitive about data. I mean, they have to give us gross sales, right? I mean, that factors in some different things, but number of employees and zip codes and things, I don't know how, something we're thinking about. Again, I don't know how valuable that's going to be in the direct connection with GHD, but I wouldn't. You could certainly ask the chamber. I wouldn't want to put them in a place where they're going to get crosswise with their membership trying to help us.
Yeah.
There's probably a better way of getting to what is the question about where are these trips originating, where are they destinating, and why, and what are those employment centers, what are those drivers? Again, and we sort of heard about this. Not all of those vehicles were, driven by fossil fuels either, and not all of them were carpools, right? So there are so many variables to that. As I sort of thinking about an area, I'm more thinking about mode shift, and Carletta kind of mentioned that. Even when you
mode shift.
So thank you, and I know Diana had a new word for you all tonight. I've got one for you also, mode shift. So that's the part of the lexicon I think is really important. It's shifting the mode for which someone is transporting, or the number of their trips in a day. When you, for example, made a decision to do more bike riding to work instead of driving your vehicle, you shifted the mode of transportation for yourself. So, bicycles are much less of a greenhouse gas footprint than even electric vehicles, which have their own problems as far as the carbon footprint is concerned that aren't always elaborated to people. So, but bicycles, much smaller footprint. So you start thinking about direct correlations in greenhouse gas reductions, direct, do A, B happens. Mode shift is probably a much more of a direct connection than trying to augment a policy-making decision with partial bits of data. Anyway, I don't know if I answered your question, Commissioner Artois, or Vice Chair Artois, but.
Well, it sounds like maybe the Chamber of Commerce at least could have a conversation with them themselves to find out how they feel about disclosing the information, because, we don't know if we don't ask. Maybe they're fine with it. I don't know.
It never hurts to ask.
Commissioner Christian.
Yeah, on number 27, preserving existing trees and forests. So years ago, the students at I think it was the Donaldson Way 5th grade, they were doing what's it called? The project-based learning, PBL. And the teacher suggested something for ideas, and one of the kids said, let's clean up the creek. So she got involved. They talked to me. I got Myrna Abramowitz involved. She got the county flood control district to come down, and then we went out to straw program, students and teachers restoring a watershed, and we ended up doing a planting project on the corner of Spikerush Circle and Wetlands Edge. And I just went to Larry Luperini, who was the superintendent of Public Works at the time. Can we plant out there? Yeah, go ahead. What do you want? Oak tree. Put a big oak tree would be nice out there. So there's 3 or 4 oaks out there now, and they're about as tall as I am, and other ones. So we've been watering them all these years. That's just one example. out at the wetlands where the Myrna Abramowitz's shade structure is in the boulder. That's either Fish and Game or land, the landfill property. It's not city property, but we have permission to plant out there. We can't plant up on the landfill because it's still harvesting the methane, but they told us it's okay to plant on that flat section. So I've had plants out there near the boulder for years. I got the what's it called? There's a shrub that's growing, lost just about everything else, but I think that oak trees will do there. So there's all these opportunities. The RCD came down with the high school students and planted along American Canyon Creek, right by the high school. There's a ton of opportunities here, but there's just no organization to do it. So I don't know why we aren't getting some, even if it's just here, some permission. I'm hoping maybe Janelle's group will take it on, but have some sort of organization, because I know people have talked to me and said, oh, that's cool. I want to plant trees. How do you get involved in that? So we can be planting trees in a ton of different places in the city, but I don't know. We just need maybe permission or organization to set up a framework or whatever it is, but let people do it and let them organize or help them organize. And it doesn't cost anything. It doesn't cost anything to gather acorns and plant them. You can take a willow tree and just do a cutting off of it, stick it in water, it'll grow. So, and we know how to do this. We have people that have learned how to do this. So I don't know why we aren't doing that. It doesn't take a ton of staff time. It doesn't take much money. It could be programmatic for Parks and Rec to have a tree planting class or program. You probably get people that want to come in. We have guest lectures, all that. It's there to just talk about low-hanging fruit, but why isn't it happening? I don't know.
Commissioner Mattson?
Thank you. So I think you were asking us to identify low-hanging fruit. Is that where you were going?
Yeah, questions and
Okay.
point out.
So low-hanging fruit, if we encourage the residents and businesses to use the Napa County Climate Challenge app, number 24, it's a way for people to start thinking on their own without us coming up with some Uber plan. The other thing was Deep Green, publicizing moving to Deep Green and publicizing, it may not actually cost that much more. That's something the city could be doing in conjunction with MCE. And the third thing is creating this dashboard with the data the city can collect so that there's a way to present to the community, this is where we think we are now in these areas. That doesn't require coming up with some monstrous project. It's analyzing what data is out there, separate from the low-hanging fruit. I'd like to see us figure out how to do a roadmap, figure out if we could either we or with MCE, a one-stop shop, or with the county, because I think that came up at the county level, and the list of existing climate-oriented projects the city's already doing. That's separate from the low-hanging fruit. I think it would help us as a commission move better through this. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, and you said Deep Green and
The dashboard.
dashboard. Okay. Commissioner Hughes.
Hello. Still awake. I also like the dashboard idea. I think it's, I think Mark called it visual, and people can go check, see, you can see what's happening, you can see the progress. I also wanted to point out, and I may be a little bit biased here, but item number 26, that is the support the development of the Eco Center. And full disclosure, I'm on ACCPF, serving on the board currently, but that's actually a tangible physical place to be, and they're going to be doing the education on site, educational programs, and it will actually be a place to learn, a place to go and see and learn about American Canyon and the wetlands. So I would strongly support number 26, not just because I'm on ACCPF, but I think having it in American Canyon, especially its location on wetlands edge, is going to be, I think it's going to be huge.
Thank you.
There's two. Oop, sorry.
Okay, Christian and Artis, do you have input on recommended items?
Sorry?
Would you like to offer some recommendations on the initiatives?
I did on the tree planting just now.
Oh, yeah, the tree planting, yep. Thank you, I forgot to write that one down. Okay, so we have 3 items, 27, 28, 29, involving trees. Are you suggesting the Miyawaki Forest?
I've heard mixed comments on that from people I've talked to. I mean, it's this idea where you put a lot of diversity. What the theory, the rationale for the plants at Newell Open Space, we tried a more diverse. We tried big leaf maple, willow. What's that one? Manzanita and the bigger one. They didn't make it. So the oaks make it.
And the Buckeyes?
Buckeye will make it if they're in the creek, but we lose a lot of them. Like up at the upper pond, I've only got 1 Buckeye left. The valley oak will grow where it gets wet, where it gets inundated with water, because they go. I think it's because they're deciduous anyway. They used to going into dormancy. But the coast live oak and the Buckeye, when they go underwater, they die. They don't make it. So, I mean, the shrubs and the grasses at Newell on that first half mile of walking, it's all disturbed because when they dug the red-legged frog ponds, they disturbed the dirt. So now the invasive species are all there. It's thistle, mustard, and teasel, and all this other stuff. So we thought if you get the trees up first, and they're the longest, start them now and get them going. Then they'll provide shade, and that'll knock down some of that other stuff. The oak trees will kind of take over at some point. I tried planting shrubs there, and it's just too hard to. They're out in the hot sun. You got to water them like crazy. They just didn't make it, but the oaks make it. So in terms of the Moriwaki, maybe if you get some shade, then you can plant some other stuff there. But right now, the 2 kinds of oaks and Buckeye and willow, you can establish them if you water them. There's 4 up at the barn that have been there 8 years. They're 12 feet tall now. And we watered them like the first 5 or 6 years. So you get them established. They had seeds this year. So I pollinated some of those seeds, and I'll be planting those to replace other ones. Moriwaki forest, I'm not sure. If we can get other stuff to grow, I'm fine with it. With diversity, I'd like to kind of stick with natives, if that works. But to me, it's such a huge, if you go on the north side of the hill, when you make the turn to go up to the picnic area, if you go off to the right in the creek and go down in that forest, it's a completely different environment. You feel like you're in a tropical forest, but it's cool. It can be really hot outside, but that whole thing, because it's on the north, heavily forested, it's just like, it's a different world in there. So when you get the trees growing, they affect the environment. They cool things down. They hold the moisture in the soil. You bring back the water. Whatever we plant, I mean, let's just get something in there. Let's get some trees in there, and all the places we can plant them. And let's start now, because they take a long time before they're valuable for sequestration.
And one of the other things we had talked about in the past was the eucalyptus at wetlands, starting to replace those with natives and getting those started growing now.
Yeah, I'd love to go in there and just plant some oaks and see what does well and see what doesn't.
Yeah.
That's kind of, I mean, you can get lots of recommendations, but the proof's in the pudding. If some stuff wants to grow there, some doesn't, and I don't know if you can always tell until you try it. And it's easy to try it. It doesn't cost you anything to go in there and start it going. And then if they take off, great. Then maybe you can reduce some of the eucalyptus. But right now, the eucalyptus provide shade, and they provide habitat for some creatures. So you don't want to just come in and tear them out.
Yeah, a lot of nesting birds up there. Um, Commissioner Artis, do you have any initiatives you'd like to propose?
Yeah, I'm good with the ones that have been mentioned. As I mentioned earlier, I'm always, looking to preserve kind of the natural open space and the grassland as well. So I think managed tree plantings that also preserve the natural system and the way that works, because there are different species and birds that populate different aspects of each of those places. So I just wouldn't want to see it all converted into a complete forest that is beyond what it currently is at this point. But I haven't done personal surveys out there, but there are species that are driven by grassland and open space, and they need that openness. And so, strategically done is good. But I'm also in favor of the aesthetics and things that people can tangibly see. Sometimes when it's out there, people don't necessarily see it. It's only the few that are going out there. So oftentimes the best way to do things that may not always be the most high impact from a carbon safe standpoint are high impact from a public perception standpoint. And that means sometimes we do things and we do those show pieces just to get the public involved and understand what we're doing. And so sometimes that includes like street tree canopy things, so people understand and they see it every day. Then they make that connection, because that's where they're living and that's where they're seeing it. They're not necessarily seeing it out there, and that's not, so I've seen that many times from projects that I've done, and always incorporate those kinds of things. So when people can see the immediate result, then they understand what's going on and they can make better decisions and become stewards of that. So,
And off of that, the first half mile up to the barn, a lot of people, that's all they go. I think half the people just go up to the barn and back. So if you had a tree canopy in there, because one thing that's missing in American Canyon is a place to walk in the shade. I've had older people tell me that wish there was a shady place. So if you had that planted with a forest and with trails, that could be the part that most people use. And there's plenty of other open space up at Newell, wetlands, grassland that can stay open space and provide that habitat. But that if we heavily plant that first half mile with trees, you could put a little trail wind through the trees, and it would be something that the only other one is out at the wetlands where Creighton took us one time. They built the skate park. There's a forest in there. But yeah, have at least one forest where people can walk around, and you'll get a certain crowd of people that will go up there just to have a shady place to walk.
Okay, can you talk about the bike plan a little bit? We have several different elements on here. And I know we already have the NBTA bike plan. We've met with Kara Werner. We've met with a lot of different bike folks that, support this cause, and as do I. But it seems like there isn't really anything we could do right now. Is that?
Yeah.
To say it like that, but
well, I know that
mean,
there might be a less dramatic way of saying that. I think we're already doing a lot of things, and
everything's already in progress.
Yeah, I think that's what we did talk about with this group as we were developing some work plans, and Diana even sort of mentioned, not in this fiscal year, but I think we're anticipating in 24-25, countywide update to the countywide bike plan. So I think this group will be involved with that and its sort of active transportation function, but not in this current fiscal year. We already have a bike and pedestrian plan. We have a local roadway safety plan. We routinely require improvements of developers. So in those areas, a lot of what we saw in that interim report was a lot of, yes, we already do that, sort of acknowledging that. There are bikeways being constructed, in capital projects today out on Green Island Road, and there's some more projects that are going to happen there as we get into the next phase of that project. There are, different trails that have already been created over in Watson Ranch, and we're always looking at opportunities to kind of build those things. So, the the biggest area of opportunity, and back to our word of the night, mode shift, the biggest area of opportunity is on the highway, where I think it's 0% that people feel safe walking on. I don't think it's 25%. I think that number is 0%. I don't. And that is where MBTA will be involved in this. But as we start to build that plan that was, contemplated as part of the project initiation document, currently there's funding for studying the SEPA and NEQA related to that project. There's the opportunity for mode shift. The 1 3/4 miles of flat ground that exists between American Canyon Road here and City Hall, of which it is pretty much not safe to be walking on the side of the highway, becomes Class 1 bikeways to go back and forth in a relatively flat environment. So the opportunity to go back and forth from commercial centers, from City Hall, really opportunities for mode shift. So I think those things are underway. Is that low-hanging fruit? And I wouldn't characterize that as low-hanging fruit, but I think those things are in place. So,
And just because if it wasn't chosen as low-hanging fruit doesn't mean that we're not supporting it. It's still,
no, and that's actually a really great point. We're not taking things off the list. This is, the council was clear. They said, we don't want perfect to get in the way of progress. Pick 2 or 3 things that are simple to do, while we continue the great effort of the committee, that they had done with the resources they had, which was pretty much not a lot. They carried the ball, they initiated the ball going forward, and it's now been given to this group in a more formal way. So it isn't taking anything off the list. It's more, we don't want to be seen as doing nothing while waiting for some perfect plan or scenario to come forward. We want a couple of small things, and those other things are still very much on the list and very much part of what's in the future.
Commissioner Mattson?
Actually, as this discussion just reminded me that I thought we could put bike lanes, like how many miles we have versus planned in this dashboard, and bike parking facilities, how many commercial facilities have bike parking or public facilities, and how many public EV chargers we have, to kind of show, to remind people that these facilities are there. So that was all.
Yeah.
Some more metrics, some more things to identify in the dashboard.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't turn on my mic, so I need to repeat that, or did you
No,
hear
I
it?
think we
Good,
captured
thanks.
it. We'll take a stab at what we're going to put on the dashboard. One of the we'll take a stab at how complicated we make this and what we put on there. I'm not saying no. I'm saying I want to kind of format what this
And
looks
a
like.
lot of the dashboard is saying this is where we are. So
It is. I'm thinking of it in terms of actual greenhouse gas emissions. So, MCE customers and those conversions, those sorts of things. Sharing the information about the bike lanes we have and where the chargers are. There's a component to that, but I got to think through the visual of what that looks like.
yeah, I get it. Thanks.
Commissioner Artis?
Yeah, I just wanted to also add that also support the development of the Eco Center, I think, because there's some surrounding conversations that have been happening tonight just about education and outreach, and then even with plantings and things like that that could come off of that, or partnerships with other organizations that are there. So if we're talking education and outreach is a needed and much needed opportunity, then having a hub and an organization that is doing that and throwing support behind them to get that going creates that opportunity for growth and organizational capacity that leads to additional things within the community. So we could be, again, as a, kind of the spider web effect of reaching a community and getting things out there that are other things on this list as well, but that could be a good starting point with the outreach and opportunity. And it also takes that out of potentially the city's hands directly and having full responsibility, but places it within an organization that has that capacity as well to do that, so.
And that project is tied in with the wetlands restoration with the Measure AA grant. And so I don't know if they've talked in terms of carbon sequestration from wetlands. I hadn't thought of that before. That was new to me. I knew trees, but not wetlands. But I don't, Erica Amon Smithies is I guess the liaison, and maybe she can ask that question of the contractors if they're considering carbon sequestration. I know they're considering if they take out the culvert, how that affects the surrounding, and they're looking at various scenarios. And so if some of those do contribute to carbon sequestration, that'd be something that we could advocate for too.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, efforts are substantially underway on the Eco Center. The city's doing, I think, a lot to support the group. We're moving operations out of there. We have approved a term sheet on a long-term lease. The next step will be a long-term lease, and then the actual entitlement. We met 2.5 weeks ago, I think, with the project team. So, yeah, definitely. I mean, efforts are proceeding on that, and I think it's fair to say we'll be supporting the foundation with some funding efforts on specific items on that project. So, I think I'm not going to call it box checked because the work hasn't been completed. It's not open, but there's great synergies there. And I would, if I was going to say, are we already doing that? I wouldn't want to say, yeah, let's support the Eco Center and say, okay, that's one of the 2 or 3 things, because I sort of think we already are. That'd be that'd be some pretty real low-hanging fruit, even though it's not done yet. And in the context of when those ideas were created, again, that was a year or so ago. So a lot has been done in the last year. So it would be a little easy to take credit to say, yeah, that's one of the 2 or 3. I think the council will look at it and say, well, you already did
4
that.
items that we check off right now.
So as I'm, thinking about how we might try and wrap up tonight, the things that I'm kind of hearing some consensus around, specifically on low-hanging fruit, are sort of the following. First, the percentage of deep green customers on MCE. That seems like a pretty low-hanging fruit, as does the app. I forget the name of what that app is called now. Yeah, sorry, thank you. The Napa County Climate Challenge, and getting more interest and engagement on those two items, and tying that in with some of our initial outreach efforts with testimonials. And I think we could actually have a testimonial around the climate challenge as well, and we might involve some of our students if they're interested. So I think there's some initial opportunities there, low-hanging fruit. There's kind of broad consensus around this notion of a dashboard to show what's happening, and to make that somewhat simple and in that vein of low-hanging fruit, rather than waiting for an entire citywide everything going on dashboard. And then really separate and apart is this notion of a roadmap, and what is the roadmap for American Canyon for 2030? Because I honestly can't answer that for you. That's not part of the low-hanging fruit per se, but it becomes the thing that we're bringing to the community to get the support on. So I think that question has to be answered. And as far as the other things on this list, around tree planting and what I'll call increasing tree planting efforts. I don't know that the specifics around a particular kind of forest are important, but the increasing the tree planting efforts. We are working with RCD. We've applied for a grant, a tree planting grant. So we've already initiated some funding opportunities for that. I don't know if we're going to get the grant, but that's a funding effort that's underway. So to me, I think those hit the mark of low-hanging fruit, at least in the council's eyes, because they don't seem like there's a lot of barriers in the way. It shows progress. And we can certainly bring back this conversation as we start developing that roadmap. And what does that look like? We're going to want to bring that back through this body to put some framework around the roadmap and see what the consultant is able to tell us, and we may have to engage them to do some real work for us. But again, I'm not someone who just wants to hire another consultant and do another report, but I do think that particular group would have some insight, having just wrapped up some work for us. That can we add on to that? What does our roadmap look like? So we'll see what they say. We'll bring that information back to this body before we get launched too far on that. But those are kind of how I'm seeing things.
I'd like to add about the tree program also, that's not just limited to Newell and the wetlands.
Correct.
Our city parks, the corridor parks.
Yeah, the RCD grant they drew a map of where the tree, it was like the whole city. So it was, they identified some examples in the application, but it isn't only in A and not someplace else.
So Scott he discussed at great length grass corridors, and I wonder, did you want to include that at this point? I don't know if I simplified your wonderful description of it, but.
I think that is beyond just these 34 things. That's at a Yeah, exactly, yeah, that's correct.
I think it's a really important conversation and something we're looking at in the general plan. And actually, on September 19th, the city council is going to get an update on the general plan. Your point is well taken, Commissioner Artis. It's a great point. I wouldn't classify it as low-hanging fruit by any means. 'Cause I think it's, the word and land use and low-hanging fruit have never been in the same conversation. But it nonetheless very important, and I'm sure it will come up in what we see on the 19th of September. And it is part of a much bigger conversation.
I'd also like to add my support for the Eco Center, although we are already, supporting that. I see that as a place where a lot of this environmental education, takes place, and not just now, into the future, and could help partner on some of these initiatives too.
Yeah,
I think that was a good summary. Sorry.
what I'm envisioning is actually a communication back to the council from me on kind of behalf of this body that summarizes today. And what I'm going to note on the Eco Center is something akin to there's broad support for that, not exactly low-hanging fruit because it's a longer-range project, and there's already a lot of progress in the works has already been done, so we didn't really want to take credit for that as one of the two or three, but broad support, and not to ignore it, but we didn't feel like we wanted to sort of say that's what we're doing because it's already being done.
As far as, reaching out to the community, that item we were talking about, the community engagement, in the past, we had done surveys, Parks and Rec surveys, about the need for parks and the different kind of play structures. How did that turn out? Did we think that we got the results, the feedback that we wanted?
We've done a lot of surveys. I'm not exactly sure
You're talking about
which
the
one
that
you're
was done
talking about, but
a number of years ago? There was
Yeah,
one that
like
built
10
it was
years
like a
ago.
recreation needs.
yeah, I mean, we
Thinking
did a
about that.
recreation needs assessment. We are, a year and a half ago, we did what was called the National Community Survey, and that went out to a very large swath of the community. It's a very formal survey with national benchmarks. Planning to do that again next spring. The localized questions for that are going to be more around utility services than sustainability. But I'm thinking around the outreach part of this, in absence of a real roadmap, our outreach has to be kind of almost vague or broad. And so, again, I don't think we should be out in front of Safeway asking people whether they want to give up their leaf blower. But I think the topic itself is worth some surveying of the community, right? If you were going to rate issues, where does sustainability fall, right? Between public safety and traffic congestion. So what's the awareness of it? And sometimes your outreach strategies is just to bring awareness to ideas and issues, right? That's what television commercials are about. They're not always selling you something. They just want to keep the brand in front of you. So, we could look at doing some broad surveying about important topics, relative importance. But I also think personalizing the topic, I really love this idea of showing somebody the MCE bill and like the 3 clicks it took for you to do that, right? And that's a kind of outreach strategy, showing someone, maybe when it's one of our students, we talk about this, the climate challenge thing, and doing a video on that. I think those are kind of low-hanging fruit ideas. This isn't some massive evaluation of the public that may not be ready for it, right? And so in the same way that we're kind of picking 2 or 3 low-hanging pieces on the sort of list, we're sort of doing a couple low-hanging things on the outreach strategy. We don't have a full-blown strategy, and we're not marketing to the community yet because we don't exactly know what that would be marketing anyway, but we're going to do a couple of steps, and the general topics of sustainability will be out there. So in that same way, taking a couple of steps there too.
We did a ton of outreach for and community engagement for the Clark Ranch plan, but we didn't implement it. It just kind of, there's stuff there that's going on that's good now, but all that outreach, I wonder, what was the value of it? And I think for Creighton did a park survey too, and they identified that we needed a 35-acre regional park, but I don't know that we're anywhere near getting that either. So I wonder about that outreach and engagement sometimes.
Okay.
or challenge this commission, the city council, and city leadership to start with deep green themselves in their personal lives, so they could share their story too and lead by example as one of the initiatives.
That's a great closing thought.
You're done.
I don't have anything else, Chair.
No management staff reports, okay.
I don't.
We're ready to adjourn. Are y'all ready? Okay, 9:24.
There we go.
Thanks, you guys, for sticking with us. Thanks for coming.
That was so hard.